The musical pillars are one of the star attractions that people love to see and experience for themselves. There are 56, which are called the Sa-Re-Ga-Ma pillars. They all come in different sizes that allow them to ring with different musical notes when tapped. 7 larger pillars stand and help support the roof, while multiple smaller pillars surround them. People who visit can use their imagination to look back through time when important people may have struck the pillars with sandalwood sticks to create a glorious melody used in worship ceremonies. The ancient Maya people in Mesoamerica built some of the most impressive structures of the ancient world. These included many different temples that celebrated their diverse range of deities. The Temple of Inscriptions is one of the most famous and impressive feats of architecture from that time. Perhaps more remarkable, for they found inside than anything. It lies deep in the jungles of Palenque, Mexico, but is visited by many independent researchers worldwide every year looking for answers. Like many temples in the Maya world, this one was constructed atop a pyramid-shaped structure with 8 steps and multiple passages and pillars. Instead of being bare stone structure like other civilizations in the area were famous for, this and other temples were covered with stucco and painted red originally. Of course, not much of this glorious exterior still exists today. The inscriptions that give this temple its name include 617 different pictures or icons that were carved into massive tablets inside the temple itself. This interior positioning is probably why they survived all the centuries since they were created. The Temple of Inscriptions constitutes the second largest collection of these carvings or glyphs that still exist from the Maya world. It took approximately 60 years for the archaeologists and historians to translate the inscriptions completely. They tell stories about historical events and indicate that they'll repeat in the future for all time. Guillermo Bernal Romero, an expert from the National Autonomous University in Mexico, figured out that the main glyphs meant the House of the 9 Sharpened Spears in 2015. Besides the impressive inscriptions, the temple also contains an important crypt within the pyramid base. Researchers believe that an important leader named Pakal, who ruled for almost 7 decades in the 600 CE, is buried there. The glyph for cutting edge was found on the tomb and contributed to the greater understanding of the inscriptions found above in the temple. As with all ancient language translations, the Maya glyphs were figured out piecemeal due to clues across many different archaeological sites. Here at the temple, understanding of the cutting edge glyph led to improved translations of many military actions during the time when the temple was active. The name or title, the House of the 9 Sharpened Spears, makes sense because the tomb wall has carvings of 9 warriors protecting the leader after his death. Pakal had been ruler since he turned 12 years old and lived a very long life. He was preceded by his mother, who ruled in his stead until he was old enough, according to the understanding of the Maya people. For 68 years he ruled as king, which makes him one of the most long-lived rulers in the history of that civilization and other groups across the Western world. This is largely ignored by Mayan archaeologists as a curiosity. Archaeological and historical research into his reign indicates that many of the impressive temples, palaces, and outposts were constructed in those days. The Temple of Inscriptions is what lie inside as the most remarkable discovery to ever come out of the Mayan kingdom. Nefarious groups, and now well documented, destroyed the Temple Baal in 2015, which left the world without this impressive piece of architecture and history that can never be replaced. It existed as a unique blend of Eastern and Greco-Roman architecture that borrowed from multiple Mediterranean styles that existed across the ancient world. The construction process began in 32 CE and continued for decades afterward. First constructed by the Canaanites, it existed to honor Baal and Aglabol, the moon god, and Yarabol, the sun god. Baal himself was the more powerful god of fertility. The people focused on his connection with rain and dew. As with all ancient agricultural societies, reciprocation and groundwater were exceptionally important for their success and survival. In those ancient times, the city was called Tadmur. When the Romans arrived, they changed the name to Palmyra, and it's now called Homs. The architectural design of the temple itself is predominantly Eastern, although it takes certain characteristics from the Roman, who came and affected the additional construction that occurred later on. For example, it has a European roof, Corinthian styling, and decorative friezes. The multiple individual shrines within the complex are evidence of the Eastern style. As with many ancient temples, the entire complex exists within a walled area that forms a giant rectangle approximately 670 feet long. This is lined by multiple porticos, so priests and worshippers could come and go as necessary for their religious practices. The whole courtyard is paved with stone. Very little of this remains other than part of the main gate and some of the courtyard floor. The destruction of this temple ruined a very important piece of the history of this region of the world. The temple itself stands atop a tiered platform, which is surrounded by the Corinthian columns. This allows entrance only at one side, where broad steps lead up to the temple doors. The building itself is aligned on a north and south axis. The chamber to the north has a unique collection of the 7 planets that the Canaanites knew of and zodiacal signs. The combination of purposes for this impressive temple of Baal made it quite unique and impressive. As the Canaanites and other people of ancient Syria worship both solar and lunar gods, it made sense to have a diversity of decorations within the temple itself. However, the unique combination of architectural styles from the different groups that controlled the region throughout time made it quite an important piece of Syrian lore and history. Unfortunately, those who seek to destroy history in their quest to change it have ruined the world's chance of enjoying the Temple of Baal and enjoying it for generations to come. In the early 400s BCE, Athens, Greece, enjoyed a golden age of success and importance. During this time, many buildings were constructed, including the Erechtheion temple, dedicated to the glorious goddess of wisdom, Athena. It was constructed in the northern area near the Acropolis. The name itself comes from a legendary and holy king who was described in Homer's Iliad as a great and powerful leader. By all accounts, he was an actual historical figure, and his name was used because of his grandeur in the lore of ancient Greece. The temple itself held an impressive wooden statue of Athena that was used heavily for cult worship purposes. According to the legends, it fell from the sky as a gift from Athena herself. Although the temple contained quite a few artifacts of interest, the architecture of the temple itself is equally impressive. The primary building has 4 different chambers, one holding the statue, and a smaller attached shrine dedicated to Hephaestus, Erechtheion, and Poseidon. The complete Erechtheion temple was constructed with Ionic design features that have intrigued architects, scientists, and historians for many years. Instead of simply being a unique building that gives insight into history, the structure itself holds considerable mysteries that have not yet given up their secrets. The style itself is unique for the time period when it was built. First of all, instead of the regular measurements and symmetry often enjoyed by ancient Greek buildings, this temple has 2 chambers that are of different sizes and even exist on different levels. Although the reason for this to be naturally occurring uneven ground, it would not have been unusual for the builders of that time to smooth things out before construction. Other unique features of the Erechtheion temple include a pool of salt water in the Poseidon shrine, 2 entrances facing the north and east instead of just one, the aforementioned iconic columns, decorated porticos, and unique clypteus carvings with rosettes and other images. Many of the unique and diverse features of this temple can be explained away by the fact that it was stopped constructed all at once. The people in charge of the design and building probably had ideas of their own that changed over the years. The city may not have had enough money to complete it in any short amount of time. This also indicated by the fact that parts of the temple and its decorations that were apparently destroyed were rebuilt for reuse. Although this has not been confirmed, the stories of the temple indicate that King Erechtheion was buried at the north side of the entrance. Cecrops, the premier king in Attica, was buried near the western side. Originally, carved images of different important historical and religious figures ringed the entire temple up near the ceiling. Whatever pieces of that frieze still exist are now housed in the Acropolis Museum. none of them are at the site of the temple anymore. This design choice that existed at some time in the past also gives a unique peek at the diversity of styles this temple has. The porticos and the walls surrounding it offer peaceful spots of shade for worshippers to enjoy. At the corner of the west and south walls, an architrave with marble columns shaped as 2-meter tall womanly figures. Different stones include white and violet marble at more contrast. Delicate columns arise from massive bases, which have complex and angled designs in contrast to this broad and smooth plains of the steps. Whenever each part of the Erechtheion temple was built, and whoever organized and completed its design and construction, it stands as one of the most unique and intriguing temples in the world today. There's no doubt that its size and style make it exceptionally grand and beautiful. While changes have taken place over multiple centuries, including a reimagining in the 600 CE as the Holy Mary Christian Church, a later palace during the Ottoman Empire control, and even a harem building for a Turkish ruler, it has since been restored to its former Grecian glory. The Temple of Seti I in Egypt has undergone the most restoration work of many of the other important historical locations around ancient Egypt. Seti I, who ruled from 1294 to 1279 BCE, began the construction of this temple. But it was only finished when Ramses II, his son, ruled after him. Because the temple is so old, it's impressive that any of it still stands today. Unfortunately, parts of it, including the large pylon in the middle, have been lost to time. The temple itself consists of 2 large courtyards and 2 hypostyle halls, one made by each of the kings. Both are decorated by a lot of carved reliefs depicting scenes such as the Osiris worship and the destruction of fierce enemies. The temple itself focuses on 7 different gods: Isis, Osiris, Horus, Amun-Re, Re-Horakti, Re, Ptah, and Memphis. A side sanctuary was also built to honor Seti the king. The original focus was on Osiris alone, but it expanded in use under the reign of Seti I and his son. The temple itself is part of Abydos, an ancient Egyptian necropolis, which is a figurative city of the dead where many important people were buried. The temple is not visited as frequently as others along the Nile, but they do give tourists a very interesting glimpse into the era's unique artistic style and colorful paintings on the ceilings and walls. The architecture itself is quite impressive with sculpted columns and intriguing altarpieces. The Temple of Seti was constructed from limestone. The different buildings and chambers that create the entire structure exist on 3 different levels. As mentioned above, the 7 different deities worshipped here each had their own small sanctuary within the main temple building. They have individual doorways that lead to adjacent esoteric rooms. In many other temples across Egypt, these individual chapels to the gods and goddesses would exist in a continuous chain so that visitors would have to walk through one to get to the other. The side-by-side instruction technique is therefore unique. The second hall is accessible through the 7 doors of these individual sanctuaries. The stone roof is supported by 36 columns that line up along the aisles in a similar way as the first hall. These are decorated with carved papyrus motifs and mimic the look of tree trunks in some cases. Not all of the columns have the same type of capitals near the roofline. The 7 sanctuaries that stem from this hall, which are also dedicated to the various gods and rulers, were likewise decorated with carved columns, reliefs, and colorful paintings that indicated not only interesting things about the worship of these deities, but also the name of Seti I himself. Each would contain a sacred bark with a picture of the god or goddess painted on it. As intriguing as all of these specific sanctuaries and columned halls are, the Temple of Seti I is also well known for a sloped corridor called the Gallery of the Kings. This holds one of the most unique and detailed records of the rulers who watched over ancient Egypt in those days. It's called the Abydos Pharaoh List and has been studied extensively by historians for many years. Not only is this an excellent record for people to study today, it originally gave Seti and Ramses an excellent opportunity to position themselves as important in the historical record. The image shows Seti burning incense alongside his son Ramses, reading from a scroll amid the vast list of pharaohs. It catalogs history from Menes, the first Egyptian ruler, all the way to Seti himself, with gaps for illegitimate or temporary kings. As the oldest temple in the Lake Nasser area, the Temple of Amada has been considered historically important. This is true due to the quality and quantity of the inscriptions contained within. They give a unique look back into events that happened during the reign of Amenhotep II. One example includes a relatively detailed description of a military force entering Asia in order to capture rebel chieftains. They were brought back and hung of the walls of Thebes to demonstrate Egypt's might and power. Another historical record comes from the reign of Merenptah, Ramses II's son, triumphed over a Libyan military action and kept Nubia safe. The original temple was built by Amenhotep II and his father Thutmose III during the 18th dynasty in ancient Egypt. It lies approximately 100 kilometers to the south of the Nile's High Dam. As with many large construction projects in Egypt, part of it was built by their successor, including Seti I. Kept some of the building associated with the temple, and especially restoration projects that occurred under Ramses II, are not considered as precise and stylish as the original architecture efforts. This may have been due to the lack of local talent, or simply because the king was so busy having temples and other important buildings constructed in other locations around the kingdom. The Temple of Amada holds unique architectural accents, along with the historical stele and paintings. One of these is a massive pylon that offers entrance into a hypostyle hall that's crafted from sandstone. It also features a type of Doric columns leading to a rear courtyard, brick walls, a hall with 12 pillars supporting the roof, and a series of shorter walls in between the columns. All of these things exist extraneous lead from the inner temple itself that holds the historical records mentioned above. The temple has smaller shrines and sanctuaries dedicated to placing offerings for the gods it celebrates. Of course, the entire thing is constructed from sandstone, which is the most popular building material in the entire Nubia region. Although the architectural style is intriguing, it does not differ enough from other Nubia or nearby temples to be historically important on its own. The reliefs inside the temple provide most of the value for archaeologists and researchers. As with most ancient Egyptian depictions of rulers and deities, these reliefs show somatic elements that involve scenes of worship in sequence. For example, one image shows Thutmose III worshiping Amun-Re and Amenhotep II worshiping Re-Horakhti. Although there were originally images of Amun throughout the temple, a later pharaoh, Thutmose IV, was a greater fan of the god Aten and decided to destroy images of the one he did not like. Ramses II attempted to restore them, but they don't hold the same quality as the original reliefs. Of course, very few ancient temples were untouched by Christian hands when the Europeans descended on Egypt. The Temple of Amada became the site of a Christian church, which partially destroyed some of the building. Instead of destroying the reliefs that depicted the heathen gods, they used plaster to cover them up, rather than keeping them away like Thutmose IV did. This could be part of the reason why they're still visible today. The plaster protected them from time and erosion. The long history of the Temple of Amada also shows what is considered graffiti by historians. Images from the 19th dynasty added royal iconography to the Viceroy Musoi. Later carvings of camels may have come from the Bedouins or other medieval visitors. When the High Aswan Dam was constructed around 1970, the entire temple was moved to a higher location to preserve it. Eventually, it seems that the destruction and changes done by various rulers and ordinary people throughout time and up being preserved due to the importance in the historical record. On the ancient Greek island of Crete lived the Minoan civilization from around 2600 to 1100 BCE. The Mycenaean civilization existed before then. Although these names were probably not used back then in the Bronze Age, they were appropriately given to the time periods by an English archaeologist named Arthur Evans. He was responsible for discovering the legendary King Minos earlier in the 1900s. The Minoans existed as one of the first great civilizations that managed to reach what is now called Europe. The continent was named for King Minos' mother, Europa, who was impregnated by Zeus. Many people who have studied ancient Greek myths are quite familiar with the tale of the Minotaur, a man with the head of a bull who was imprisoned in a labyrinth. He was supposedly the illegitimate offspring of the queen Paphos and an actual bull. This represents just one intriguing legend from the Minoan civilization. As Arthur Evans and other researchers over the years have delved deeper into the history, even more unique myths and records have been found. The Palace of Knossos' discovery began the process of connecting the oral tradition and written tales with the history of the civilization itself. Arthur Evans was known in the archaeological community. He had quite a lot of money and fame, which allowed him to travel the world, purchase land of archaeological importance, and study it at his leisure. The person who discovered this palace in 1878 was called Kalokairenos. He studied, bought, and sold antiques in Greece at the time. The tale of the Minotaur and the labyrinth undoubtedly got some of its details from the Palace of Knossos itself. The complex stretched some 20,000 meters in length, had many chambers dedicated to politics and religion, was laid out in a rather maze-like fashion, and had over 1,000 halls and rooms in total. The palace itself ranged from 1 story up to 5 stories and included a functional plumbing system with running water and a way to carry waste away from the living quarters. The decorations on the walls inside of the palace showcased the unique sense of social equality that existed in the Minoan civilization. They showed useful men and women having fun, dancing, picking flowers in the garden, or jumping over bulls in some sort of sport or game. The unique artwork of this palace continues outside of the throne room, where you can see images of griffins, papyrus plants, and graceful palm trees. Interestingly enough, no one has been able to figure out why the Minoan civilization ended. Although some people suggest that a tsunami or other geological event destroyed much of the city, perhaps it was their peaceful lifestyle that allowed them to be taken over by later groups. Besides the labyrinth structure and unique artwork style of the Palace of Knossos, the throne room in the palace is the most unique location inside. Archaeologists suggest it was constructed in the 1600s BCE, which makes it the oldest seat of power in Europe. It's definitely the oldest one fashioned from alabaster stone. Arthur Evans originally assumed that King Minos himself sat on the throne, but later historians have expressed their disagreement with this theory. Many believe that this was a ceremonial center that focused on the Minoan spiritual practices. It contains the impressive throne, many benches made of gypsum, and a large basin. This was probably used for lustration or ritual bathing, intended to purify the person who did it. The ceiling was open above it, and although the palace did contain plumbing, the basin itself had no drainage abilities. This leads many people to believe that it was not used for bathing at all, as the water would have grown quite murky. Approximately 30 people could have sat there comfortably. Historians expect that the throne itself and other features of the room would have been decorated extensively. Ancient Mesopotamia has a special place in the history of the world as one of the first civilizations that arose anywhere. It's also the site of the famous Ziggurat of Ur, which is one of the larger representations of these early pyramid-shaped temples. The name Mesopotamia comes from the Greek for between rivers, which makes it highly appropriate for this realm that arose between the Euphrates and Tigris River. The early ziggurats built in this and nearby locations were made primarily of mud bricks and constructed in a series of steps that arose high over the valley floor. Unlike the Egyptian pyramids, those in Mesopotamia were not primarily for rulers. Instead, the tall structures served ceremonial purposes. The Ziggurat of Ur has 4 sloping sides, 3 tiers, and 3 giant staircases that lead up to the entryway at the top. The estimated origin heights put the structure at around 800 to 100 feet tall. Some disagreement exists about how large it may have been. The remaining evidence of the Ziggurat of Ur comes only from its foundation and other historical records that describe the architectural style and building purposes practiced by the rulers when it came to honoring their gods and goddesses. It was built in approximately 2000 BCE as a place of worship and honor for the moon god named Nana. The Mesopotamians who lived in Ur took him, the so-called Lord of Wisdom, as their patron deity. He was also called the father or chief of all the gods. It seems quite obvious why the people who lived there at the time would have constructed one of their most outstanding buildings to the most important deity in their pantheon. Nana was a direct son of Enlil and Nanlil, the lord of air and earth and the goddess guardian of destiny. His parents were essentially the source of most deities and spiritual beliefs in Mesopotamia. It would make sense for the people to spend so much time, materials, and energy constructing such a massive temple in his honor. As important as the ziggurat was, it went to various incantations over the centuries. King Ur-Nammu rebuilt the structure a few decades after it was originally constructed. Various people, such as the Elamites, destroyed it during their quest for power in the region, and it was rebuilt again by Nebuchadnezzar II. It wasn't until the 1850s that it was discovered by William Kennett Loftus. In the 1920s, Sir Leonard Woolley began more serious excavation at the Ziggurat of Ur location. Compared to other structures from this ancient civilization, it's surprisingly well preserved, perhaps because it was rebuilt multiple times in the past. The well-known Ziggurat of Ur underwent an additional restoration project in the 1970s. Historians and archaeologists believe that Ur is one of the initial locations where all civilization began. The ancient times when people settled down, learned about agriculture and animal husbandry, and began to build massive structures in honor of their deities matters to the history of the world. Around 4000 BC in Malta, the great rulers of that early civilization believed in a pantheon of gods and goddesses and an afterlife. They ordered the building of the Hal Saflieni Hypogeum as a part necropolis or city of the dead and part sanctuary. The term hypogeum is Greek for under the ground. It's interesting to note that this unique temple consists of primarily subterranean building. Despite carving out of the limestone ground, it does share surprising similarities with surface architecture used in the early Maltese temples. The Hal Saflieni Hypogeum was discovered in 1902 quite by accident. A team of construction workers were preparing the plumbing system for a housing development being built on the surface. Some of their digging poked a hole in the roof of the temple. In order to prevent them from losing their jobs or having to stop work, they simply covered up the hole and continued. However, news of the discovery got out and archaeologists began their investigations. The underground temple has 3 levels hollowed out for various purposes. The top level, which was constructed first, obviously, mostly contains burial chambers extending out from the walls. It also includes a ladder passageway that brings you down to the mid-level area. Tucked safely underground, these chambers were not affected too much by erosion or weathering. This has allowed some of the earliest Malta paintings still exist on the walls. If you walk down 7 steps, you reach the lowest level, which held most of the loose artifacts discovered by the archaeologists. The objects found at Hal Saflieni Hypogeum include both human and animal figurines in both realistic and iconic shapes. One of the most noteworthy is now called the Sleeping Lady, which most historians agree is a small statue of a goddess. In general, the figurines in the entire temple itself seem focused on honoring the dead and their passage to the afterlife in spirit form. Manuel Magri, working in conjunction with the museum's committee, led the first archaeological expedition into Hal Saflieni Hypogeum in 1903. Unfortunately, the lax habits of these early explorers led them to simply discard a lot of the artifacts, human remains, and other items found there. Magri traveled to Tunisia a few years later with his report on the Malta Temple. When he passed away in 1907, the report vanished. Different stories emerged about the purpose of this unique underground temple. Some call it a necropolis or burial chamber that held the remains of over 6,000 people. Others suggest that it's just the lowest levels of what used to be a large above-ground temple, or could be an entranceway to natural caves or catacombs that have not yet been discovered. The mirror of surface architecture flipped under the ground is sometimes called architecture in the negative. Why did the ancient people take such care to create these levels underground when it was undoubtedly easier to build them above? Another very odd feature of the Hal Saflieni Hypogeum is its amazing acoustic attributes. These make many modern researchers believe that the temple may have had ceremonial purposes along with being a place to put the dead. In the second level below the ground, a chamber known as the Oracle Room resonates at the 70 Hz and 114 Hz frequencies. Both drums and male voices can hit these levels, which creates an amazing echo or resonance that may contribute to the hypnotic or mystical qualities of ceremonial music. The last temple in the spectacular genre must certainly be Gobekli Tepe. Archaeologists detest that this is a temple, which they admit it is. They so badly wanted agriculture to be the foundation of religious worship, which it is clearly not, by a whopping 6,000 years earlier, farther back through time than any of the other. Gobekli Tepe was built in approximately 10,000 BCE, which gives such unique insight into the history of civilization as we know it on Earth. Today, the site rests only 15 kilometers from Sanliurfa city. The temple itself is a collection of buildings focused on religious worship. There are round and oval buildings constructed on a hill. More exploration with higher technology, such as ground-penetrating radar, shows at least 20 structures in all. This whole thing together makes up the Gobekli Tepe temple. Each structure that's already been excavated features massive T-shaped pillars that may be anywhere from 3 to 6 meters tall. Each holds carvings of humans, animals, and semi-geometric shapes as decoration. One of the most mysterious aspects of these massive structures is the question about how they were carved, quarried, and transferred to this spot. 12,000 years ago, people worked with stone tools. Ordinary historical records show that most people were nomadic hunters and gatherers, and that agriculture and animal taming were in their infancy. Nevertheless, the people who lived in this area of what is now Turkey were able to extract these 10 to 20-ton pillars from the ground, shape them, and move them hundreds of meters away to reach the hilltop temple grounds. The number of workers that must have been necessary would have been astounding. Not only did they perform the above feats, but they also arranged the pillars in concentric circles. Complex is laid out with 6 T-shaped pillars at the circumference, stone walls connecting them, and larger pillars in the center of the ring. These rings measure up to 65 feet in diameter. Although more may be hiding or lost to time, over 200 pillars have already been discovered by the archaeologists. The archaeological importance of the Gobekli Tepe temple complex cannot be understated. In a time when most historians believe people were hunting game and gathering wild foods using only stone tools and primitive weaponry, the people who called this region their home were quarrying massive rocks and creating a religious compound. Some suggest the wildest method so they could perform these amazing feats. These inventive ideas are often repeated for other impressive sites all around the world, from the megaliths at Machu Picchu to the Egyptian pyramids and beyond. Although many people refuse to consider alternative ideas, many of the historical details about well-known temples and other structures seem to back up the idea that some sort of higher technology from a singular group was used. Not only were the massive stones cut and moved in ways that would not seem possible back then, but the megalithic structures themselves seem to match anywhere they are in the world. Although sites like Gobekli Tepe are still shrouded in mystery, many people are not quick to assume that ancient flying machines or alien technology was used in their construction. After all, what would be their purpose? Other ideas are equally mysterious. Some religious scholars suggest that this temple was part of the biblical Garden of Eden and is one of the sources of all life on Earth. Whatever the answer, it seems that the generally accepted historical record of what people were capable of doing at certain periods of prehistory is not entirely accurate. How can man create such amazing feats of construction like Gobekli Tepe in 10,000 BC? The dates simply don't match up to the expectations that researchers have when it comes to tool use and settled civilizations themselves. Science has dated the site, but it has a hard time making sense of the construction techniques, engravings, metalwork, and pottery found there. someone is wrong about something. Whether it's extraordinary odds or researchers simply don't know the truth about civilization's progress through history remains to be seen. The megalithic structures found at many sites around the world have generated endless controversy as to how they were built. Conventional archaeologists, who dismiss the possibility of highly advanced civilizations in the remote past, insist that they were built solely with the use of primitive tools and brute force. Some of the structures, or parts of them, could have been built in this way. However, a number of engineers have stated that some features would be difficult, if not impossible, to duplicate today, even using the most advanced technology. The sheer weight and size of some of the stone blocks have prompted several researchers to wonder whether the ancient builders had mastered some form of levitation technology. Behind each structure you're about to see, from Japan to Saudi Arabia, there's a lot of mystery and intrigue that has puzzled even the best scientists. Asuka is a village nestled among the hills of the Nara prefecture of Kansai, Japan. The area is known for its many Buddhist temples, shrines, and statuary, but there are unusually shaped granite stones and stone-carved figures that still defy explanation. Apart from the Shimuzen Seki, a garden fixture carved to suggest Mount Sumeru of Buddhist mythology, or the male-female stone carving which likewise was designed as a fountain, the purposes originally associated with the other worked stones, bearing such names as Masuda no Iwafune, Sakafune Ishi, Kame Ishi, Miroku Ishi, Nimen Seki, etc., is unknown and does not fit with Buddhist-style sculpture or construction. They have been, for the most part, ignored by academics. Let's focus on the largest of those monuments. It's known as Masuda no Iwafune, which is said to mean rock ship of Masuda. The monument is 11 meters long, 8 meters wide, and 4.7 meters high, and weighs approximately 1,000 tons, carved from a single piece of granite. The upper surface is flat with a shallow trough and 2 square holes. At the base of the stone, there are protruding notches that are believed to be related to the process used by the builders to flatten the sides of the rock. It sits atop the steep incline of a hill near Okadera Station. Some believe the shape and contour of the rock is very compelling evidence for past alien encounters. In fact, most ancient astronaut researchers in the area believe Masuda no Iwafune is a replica of a godlike vehicle. Other researchers have speculated that it could be a piece of evidence that shows signs of an advanced technology in the past because of the skill involved in making it. Obviously, it's an incredibly advanced construction for its time. Another remarkable fact is that the granite rock from which the megaliths were created is incredibly hard. Even with modern equipment, it's very difficult to even apply a scratch to the surface. Locals believe in the magical powers of megaliths and try to avoid them, and many more will not touch the stones. Today, these stones still represent one of the greatest archaeological puzzles of Japan, because no archaeologist can state with certainty how old the Masuda no Iwafune really is, or what its original function might have been. There are many more of these enigmatic features of ancient Japan that are, as of now, lost to the pages of history. Sayhuite is an archaeological site 47 kilometers east of the city of Abancay, about 3 hours away from the city of Cusco, in the province of Abancay, in the region of Apurímac in Peru. To some historians, the site is regarded as a center of religious worship for Inca people. But beyond the ruins of the Inca temple are mysterious automobile-sized stones, which have clearly been shaped with an unknown technology. Whoever created the massive stones is another massive mystery. Although it's thought that the place was an Inca sanctuary, archaeologists are not sure the ancient Incans were the constructors. The stone is made of andesite, which is as hard as granite, and the Inca had at best bronze tools or meteorite iron hammers. This is why much doubt has been cast on the origins of the monuments and their archaeological site of Sayhuite. This intricate stone block is adorned with more than 200 zoomorphic and geometric figures, which together compose something like a 3D relief. The entire rock itself is even formed in the shape of a feline head. It's said to have been transported to the hill since it's not a natural outcrop. Some carvings represent geographical figures and human constructions, while making use of certain shapes natural to the rock formation. The top of the stone is completely resurfaced with complex designs with many resembling streets, stairways, channels, and buildings. Perhaps the stone carving represents a map of a lost city, or, as some theories suggest, it may be a depiction of the universe itself. Researcher Dr. Arlen Andrews Sr. believes the monolith was used as a scale model to design, develop, test, and document the water flow for public water projects, and to teach ancient engineers and technicians the concepts and practices required. While the precise meaning of this stone remains unsolved, the monolith is part of the material culture of the Incan people, and as such helps archaeologists piece together how and why they lived this way. Understanding the Incan culture from an archaeological perspective helps archaeologists apply this knowledge to similar civilizations and find links between ancient cultures. In any case, however, the Sayhuite monolith remains an intriguing mystery, and no doubt people will continue to speculate about it, from its creators to its function, for years to come. Intihuatana stone is a sacred ritual stone for the Incas, which has 4 sides considered as the 4 cardinal points: north, south, east, and west. The most famous Intihuatana stone is located at the archaeological site of Machu Picchu, which is located on top of the sacred mountain. This is a simple wonder reflecting the perfection of ancient technology. This wonderful sculpture, to put it one way, had of course more functions than being a beautiful decorative piece, which it surely is. The stone's name is translated into English as the hitching post of the sun, because the Incas believed that the stone can hold the sun in its place along its annual path in the sky. The sun almost stands at the pillars at midday on March 21st and September 21st, when the equinoxes occur. Daytime equals nighttime. Then no shadow is cast at all. The monolithic structure, carved in gray granite, up to 2 meters high and 2 meters in diameter. Its base does not have a defined shape, but at the top stands out an upright stone column. In addition, it features a granite block resembling a bench. However, who actually made this is again open to question. Brienne Forrester states, "The lack of tool marks on the surfaces may indicate that the work done to make these enigmas was long before Inca times, possibly by a culture called the Pear House or Viracochas. Viracocha is the name or title in the Quechua language of the Inca creator god at the time of the Spanish conquest of Peru in the 16th century. According to Inca beliefs, Viracocha made earth and sky, then fashioned from stone a race of giants. Displeased with them, he turned some giants back into stone and destroyed the rest in a flood. It's often said that the Intihuatana stone serves as a portal to another world. These stones were extremely sacred to the Incas. Peruvian shamans claimed and still claim that if a sensitive person touches their forehead to the stone, it would open their vision to the spirit world. During their conquest, the Spaniards specifically sought out and destroyed many Intihuatana stones. The Incans believed that when an Intihuatana stone was broken, the deities pertaining to that sacred spot would die. Many mysteries are written around the stone. They tie the sun because if the sun goes out, his life will be finished, and the sun brings to life all creatures, is the light of the life. Back to Japan now. 100 kilometers west of Asuka Park, near Takasago, there is mysterious object standing beside the rock massif. Ishinohoden is a monolith, semi-finished product. In other words, a block that's remained in place since its production and which has clear signs that it has not yet been fully completed. It's estimated to be at least 1,500 years old. The temple is built precisely near the megalith because it's believed holy and people have venerated it since ancient times. The official version is that the rock was meant to be a tomb, but there's no scientific information as to who built it nor what its true purpose is. The mysterious cube monument is dug out of the surrounding rock, similar to the rock churches in Ethiopia. The makers skillfully position the stone to appear as if it's actually hovering above the pool of water it stands in, with the overall structure being situated in an old quarry. It's known as one of the greatest enigmas of Japan's ancient history, and is now worshipped as the god of a Shiko Jinja Shinto shrine. Although the structure of the top is concealed by pine trees, it's thought that there may be two holes like Masada no Iwafune and Kengo Shizuka Kofun. Some say that it's supposed to show a sky ship with a long-gone people coming down from heaven. The stone is 5.6 meters high, 6.5 meters wide, and 7.5 meters deep, with a weight of 500 tons. This makes the stone larger than any of the stones used in the Great Pyramid of Giza, the largest of which was 80 tons, while the typical large base stones of that pyramid were 6 to 10 tons. There are no regular traces or drills or chisels on Ishinohoden. This surface character again raises questions about a certain type of mechanical tool that does not spoil, but simply crushes or grinds the material. Even seeing the difference between the surfaces of Masudu Iwafune and Ishinohoden, it's quite possible that the same tool was used when machining both objects. The stone monument was built from hyalocastite stone, which is a volcanic rock consisting of glassy large pieces contained in a fine-grained matrix dominated by glassy shards or smaller pieces. Something like this might lead us to speculate on a melting process with high technologies. Because of the enormous size alone, it's safe to assume that it was built by a technologically developed civilization, and with its overwhelming presence and its mystique, it continues to fascinate people even today. There are many strange sites in the Arabian Peninsula that might puzzle even the most well-traveled researcher. One of them is Al-Nasla rock formation. This rock is split through the middle by a clean and straight crack, which looks almost as if the rock was sliced with a laser. It's located in Tema Oasis, Saudi Arabia. Archaeologists have also discovered cuneiform inscriptions which are possibly dating from the 6th century BCE at the oasis city. They show Al-Nasla was a major trade route in antiquity and was once the dwelling place of a Babylonian king, Nabonidus. It's referenced in both Assyrian and biblical sources as a trading post and is also known for abundant rock art made as much as 4,000 years ago. Just imagine walking around in the desert, exploring the unknown, and you come across a massive standing stone split in half by a perfect line. What would be the first thing that jumps to your mind? The rock was discovered in 1833 by Charles Huver, and it's been at the heart of many theories and controversy since then. There have been numerous speculations to ascertain the reason and the method of the cut, However, the mystery of this megalith is still as shrouded as it was at the time of its discovery. One of the vertical fields is flat, almost like it's been cut by a modern device. Could it have been worked on at some point with some sort of precise ancient tool? Taking a closer look at this stone of Al-Nasla, you cannot help but wonder what its true purpose was. Is the split in the rock really a result of the forces of nature, as some experts suggest? Or is it possible that just as there are many other ancient places on Earth, dating back thousands of years, featuring precision cuts, this stone too was crafted by an unknown technology? Uniquely, in each of the lower parts of the Al-Nasla stone, it looks like a buffer has formed by rocks that are much smaller or similar to a shock absorber, which prevents it from touching the ground. This has made archaeologists shake their heads in puzzlement, and many continue to try to solve the mystery to this day. Today, this part of the Saudi Arabian desert is still under investigation for archaeological remains. Of course, the last question we should ask is, how long the rocks will remain balanced? Before the advent of Islam, Afghanistan was an important center of Buddhist teaching. To find remnants of this Buddhist past, one has to search extremely thoroughly. The once rich excavation sites have turned to rubble after decades of neglect. One of these remnants and lesser-known curiosities of Afghanistan is the Takht-i-Rustam monument in Samangan province, between Mazar-e-Sharif and Kunduz in the north. This stupa was named after Rustam III, the Persian ruler of the Bavan dynasty. Unlike others, this stupa has not been mounted above ground, but it's been carved into the ground in a style that, again, resembles the monolithic churches of Ethiopia. The dome-shaped structure of the highly polished limestone, 8 meters high and 28 meters across, is encircled by a 2-meter wide passageway at its foot, which was used by pilgrims for circumambulation. Historicity of the town is dated to the Kushan dynasty reign during the 4th and 5th centuries. It represents the earliest link to the evolution of Buddhist architecture in Afghanistan. The monastery of the major Buddhist tradition, the Theravada Buddhism, has 5 chambers. 2 are sanctuaries and 1 is a domed ceiling with an intricate lotus leaf beautification. There are several caves at the base of the stupa. Above one of the caves, there's a square building with 2 conference halls. One is 22 meters square and the other is circular. In one of these caves, archaeological excavations have revealed a cache of Ghaznavid coins. One must ask, how could Buddhists have built this strange and mysterious building? But if you do, you probably won't find an answer. There are very few records of how this place was constructed or how long it took to make. Historians have proposed 2 possible reasons why the stupa has been carved in the ground instead of being built above the ground. One explanation is that it could have been done for the purpose of camouflage to protect the monastery from invaders. Another much more mundane explanation states that it's simply been done to escape the excessive hot and cold climate extremes of Afghanistan. Some ancient astronaut researchers suggest that it can have connection to mysterious flying ships that visited Earth 6,000 years ago, according to ancient Vedic texts. They say stupas design-wise are much like flying ships, vimanas, seen around the world. Is it possible that an ancient flying machine, reportedly discovered in a cave in Afghanistan in 2012, could be one of these ancient flying vehicles? Quirigua is a remarkable place. It's located in the southeastern border of the Maya lowlands in Guatemala. What makes this place remarkable is the stelae and zoomorphs discovered by explorers John Lloyd Stevens and Frederick Catherwood, who were the first to record and document the site in 1840. These intricate works of stone are the latest and best preserved of the Mayan world. Originally, Quirigua was under the rule of the dynasty of the city of Copan, now Honduras, but in 738 AD the Quirigua dynasty managed to become independent and even subjugate the Copan dynasty, and that's when the city reached its peak. Most of the monumental constructions and the Acropolis, as well as the stelae, were erected during the following 60 years of reign of the new Quirigua dynasty, a dynasty that dominated the region of the Copan River and the Matagua River. These monoliths were carved out of sandstone by Mayan stonemasons who had no access to metal tools, which is an amazing feat. It's even more so when one considers the intricate designs that cover them. Zoomorph P is the largest of the Zoomorpho at Quirigua, and according to some, it's the greatest Mesoamerican monument ever discovered. Weighing over 20 tons, it stands 2 meters tall, measures 3.5 meters wide and 3 meters long. It provides a surface area of about 402 meters or 1,314 feet, and every square centimeter is engraved with information. You'll see Zoomorph P marries two key principles. Firstly, the king rests in the jaws of a mythical beast. Secondly, he holds the mannequin scepter and shield, which is shown on many of the stelae. One interpretation of this scene is that it's meant to be a reenactment of the creation of man. Explorer Maudslay nicknamed it the Great Turtle. It weighs around 20 tons. The design of the zoomorph is incredibly intricate, and the whole monument is covered with skillfully executed sculpture. It's located in the Ball Court Plaza, just south of the Ball Court. Zoomorph P is accompanied by an altar depicting an unidentified deity leaping from a split in the earth. A hieroglyph text on the zoomorph describes the founding of Quirigua under the supervision of the King of Copan. Traces of red pigment have been found on this monument, suggesting that it was originally painted red. John Lloyd Stephens and Frederick Catherwood's books on Quirigua makes for some fascinating reading. After they discovered the place, they were followed by Alfred Maudslay in the 1880s and 90s, who documented the site through his excellent photographic methods. Sylvanus Morley started systematic excavations in the early 1900s. Excavation and consolidation continued in the 1970s and 80s. Pumapunku is part of a wider temple complex found in the ancient city of Tiwanaku in western Bolivia. Both are viewed as the most mysterious archaeological sites in all of South America. Situated 3,800 meters above sea level, Tiwanaku predates the ancient Inca civilization of pre-Columbian South America. There's no written record of the ancient city prior to Inca settlement, with the Incas believing to be a holy site where their deity of creation, Viracocha, started life, with the various ethnicities of human being created here before moving out into the wider world. Pumapunku, the door of the Puma, is one of many examples of the incredible masonry work found throughout Tiwanaku. It and many other structures were created with startling precision that predates the technology and methods available at the time, with doorways, stone blocks, smoothly drilled holes, an irrigation system, and other complex examples of stonework found throughout the site. The blocks used to create perfectly interlock and look like they were manufactured using modern machinery. A huge stone terrace and walls would feature massive blocks that interlock with each other with the finest precision. They form load-bearing joints, and no mortar was used when building the site. The precision needed to make these cuts into huge stone blocks has given birth to many theories about the origins of Pumapunku and Tiwanaku. Many theorize that an advanced ancient civilization predating the Incas were responsible and had technologies well beyond a civilization for a much later period. We know Incas didn't have the capabilities to pull off such feats of engineering. How could a civilization that predates them by hundreds of years do so? According to engineers, one of the largest single stones ever to be moved and put into building anywhere on Earth, about 400 tons, was transported to Tiwanaku from a quarry over 200 miles away. This feat is more incredible when one realizes the route of transport was through a mountain range up to 15,000 feet. They've amazed countless travelers such as the Spanish chronicler Pedro Cieza de Leon, who observed that some of these stones are very worn and washed, and there are others so large that one wonders how human hands could have brought them to where they now stand. When one considers the work, I cannot understand or fathom what kind of instruments or tools were used to work them, for it's evident that before these huge stones were dressed and brought to perfection, they must have been much larger to have been left as we see them. I would say that I consider this the oldest antiquity in all of Peru. Other stones at Pumapunku contain inexplicable grooves and niches. Some researchers have speculated they may have used metal clamps. To create these clamps, the construction workers would have had to deploy a portable furnace to pour the molten liquid metal into the grooves. Any delay could solidify the metal, beating the purpose of melting it. Therefore, evidently, the constructors of Pumapunku not only were well versed with the science of metal making, but also they were advanced enough that they could create a portable furnace device to achieve the technique of clamping. Here we see stone pillars with meticulously carved grooves in them. The precision and accuracy with which these grooves have been created is incredible given the time. What's more remarkable is that they show signs of tooling and machining. It's been speculated that only diamond-tipped tools could have cut through the unforgiving diorite. However, that subject also has much debate. How such massive stone blocks were carried to the site is a topic of debate, and whilst giants seems to be a wilder theory, it's certainly one that carries some weight when considering how the creators of this place managed to move these huge blocks. This would involve carrying stone blocks weighing several dozen tons, many miles, and up a steep mountain incline. The mainstream theory is that a labor force from the ancient settlers of Tiwanaku completed the task, but what techniques they could have used remains hotly disputed given the complex route to the site. The largest stone blocks used in Pumapunku are around 7.8 meters long, 5 meters wide, and roughly a meter thick, with an average weight estimated to be 131 tons. The site is 2 miles above sea level. There's no evidence of the wheel in Tiwanakan culture, and there are no trees in the area to use as rollers. The feat of moving the stones for 10 miles, let alone 90, would be an incredible achievement. Interestingly, the age of the site has also been hotly debated over the years. After its original discovery by explorer Arthur Poznański, the site was dated to around 15,000 BC. He based this finding on the astronomical alignment of the main temple, which acts as a sort of sundial based on the sun's positioning. During his time there, the sunrise didn't follow the alignment of the temple's cornerstone as expected, leading him to calculate that the sunrise would follow the proper alignment 17,000 years prior. However, modern radiocarbon dating places it as much more recent construction, sometime around AD 600, although many cite these findings as inaccurate and unreliable. Tiwanaku seems to have faced a sudden, catastrophic end. In the layers of rock that date to the same time, now extinct species of plants and animals can be found mixed in with human skeletal remains. Everything seems to be jumbled together, as if a tidal wave or some other event caused major changes on the Earth's surface, including the life that inhabited it. This gives credence to the theory that a global flood, found throughout mythology, did occur. Ollantaytambo is a town found 72 kilometers from the city of Cusco, Peru, that is a prominent archaeological site with some incredible megalithic structures. Situated 2,792 meters above sea level, it's the starting point of the historical Sacred Valley, a prominent tourist route that leads to Peru's famous Inca archaeological sites, including Machu Picchu, Pisac, Chinchero, and Ollantaytambo itself. This ancient marvel of engineering is believed to have been built around 1440 AD by Inca Emperor Pachacuti. However, many researchers believe that this ancient site dates back much further in time than we can imagine. There are many noteworthy structures in Ollantaytambo, including the Temple Hill. Made from huge stone blocks that weigh some 50 tons, the heaviest are thought to weigh as much as 150 tons. They were placed with such precision using a cut and fit method that no mortar was needed, a common fixture of architecture in Peru. Modern technology can't even lift some of the stones, let alone position them such that a human hair cannot fit through. Clearly, the techniques used to produce these features has been lost to modern science. Yet it's evident of how advanced ancient peoples were. Soft stones could also explain the precision fit. The stones would settle by their own weight and the weight of the ones on top, thereby squeezing into any gaps. The protrusions could be formed by making marks in the support structure that would be necessary to prevent uncontrolled movement of the material at the outer face of the wall. Amazingly, the stones used for this megalithic structure are thought to be quarried from a mountaintop quarry about 7 miles from Ollantaytambo. This means that the stones would need to be lowered down a steep portion of the mountain or transported over river canyon with near vertical rock walls. This method would then require the blocks to be lifted back up another portion of the mountain to the site of the town. Given the technological limitations of the time, a remarkable achievement if true. Advocates of such push and shove technique point out that the remains of a ramp do exist, leading up to the hillside, and that furthermore numerous stones, the so-called tired stones, which never made it to the top, can be seen lying at the foot of the ramp. Unfortunately, this evidence only explains the stones that did not get up to the ramp. It tells us nothing about the stones which we see at the top of the hill. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that the megalithic structures already existed in Inca times, and that the ramp and tired stones represent the efforts of the Incas to emulate what they saw. How is it possible that the massive stone walls display fascinating similarities to ancient walls found halfway around the globe in Egypt? Does this mean that ancient cultures shared the same building techniques? Does this mean that ancient cultures around the globe had access to some sort of advanced ancient technology that's been lost since then? The Wall of the Six Monoliths is the main highlight of the Temple Hill area, which is an unfinished building made from 6 massive stone blocks. It's one of the most iconic and baffling pieces of architecture yet to be discovered. Standing approximately 36 feet wide and 14 feet high, the wall is one of the great mysteries of the Andes. It consists of 6 massive andesite monoliths, which are curiously divided by small strips, which seem to serve little purpose other than to add a modern riveted steel effect to this ancient wall. The rocks are all masterfully crafted to leave not even a paper-thin crack between them. We can easily see where they were carved from the rock face on the other side of the valley. Several questions arise from even a cursory examination, though. The cut marks are perfectly square. You would think that the stone would be knocked out of the rock face and then squared. That's how modern stone cutters would do it. Not so here. It almost looks as if the rock was scraped off the mountain face. Secondly, the surface of the cuts is glassy smooth, not rough the way you'd expect sawn or chiseled surfaces to be. Also, why did they cut the rocks from a place that are sometimes up to 130 feet above the floor of the valley? It would be akin to taking an incredibly difficult job and making it 100 times harder just for the fun of it. There is one interesting theory, and that is levitation. Unfortunately, science has still not been able to figure out how to levitate large, heavier objects. Yet, history suggests the ancient civilizations might have already cracked this secret in their building of the pyramids and other megalithic monuments. Did they have some advanced form of sound levitation to move 1,000-ton stones? A task that present-day builders admit would be difficult even with the use of modern cranes? Another interesting find lay on the bottom from where these rocks were cut out of. we find strange but precise crisscross patterns. The pattern that we see appears to be a trace left by some kind of machinery that was left behind at the time these slabs were being removed. Possibly these marks could have been created by some kind of laser or saw machine. So yes, this could be one of the most clear pieces of evidence that the ancients did in fact use some sort of advanced technology at the time they were cutting, removing, and shaping these incredible rocks. There are also several unused stone blocks scattered around the area that show most of the Temple Hill center was incomplete when the town was abandoned. Other blocks look to have been removed from the walls in the area too, suggesting that a major reconstruction project may have begun at some point. Further afield from the town are several storehouses built for the farmers working along the winding terraces that surround Ollantaytambo. There's also a road that the Incas built that connected Ollantaytambo to Machu Picchu and Pisac, which is used today for the many tourists trekking through Peru's most famous Inca sites. Is this evidence of an advanced, now lost worldwide civilization that spread throughout the world and allowed its mystery builders to cut with laser-like precision, intricately carve and transport massive rocks weighing over hundreds of tons in weight? Is this evidence of an ancient alien civilization that came to Earth many thousands of years ago and helped mankind evolve? Or is it simply the ingenuity of mankind? Thanks for watching. Leave a like and hit the bell button to stay notified. The Shining Ones of Mesopotamia. What or who are the Shining Ones? It's possibly the biggest question to come out of Mesopotamia. It's such a unique, specific terminology to describe a group of beings, entities, or deities. However, the Shining Ones, as they're referred to in so many ancient cultures and texts, all supposedly independent from each other. They're often given specific names in those cultures, yet their nickname, the Shining Ones, whatever the attribution of shining means, is a nickname that stuck across vast distances and epochs. In Mesopotamia, they were referred to as the Apkallu, the Anunnaki, or Urshu. Generally, they're described as serpent beings, seven sages, fish beings, feathered serpents, angels, watchers, or elders. In ancient Egypt, they went by the name of Neteru or Shemsu Hor. The Dogon culture's spin-off from Egypt, they were called the Nomos. In India, they bore names like Devas or Nagas. Biblical accounts give them or their descendants names like Elohim, Nephilim, Geborim, Seraphim, or Rephaim. Whether world mythologies, religious, or ancient historical texts, there is repetitive, specific references to a group of divinity known as the Shining Ones. They're often presented as gifted individuals, preservers of ancient knowledge. They're often described as amazing deities who created mankind and walked among humans. At the same time, they are also described as serpent, fish-like, angels, or birdmen. However, the Apkallu, certainly in later Babylonian times, may have simply been some priesthood reenacting rituals associated with the original Shining Ones. Mythology, oral history, and symbolism may well be the only method of knowledge-keeping that lasts the ravages of time. Texts degrade. Maybe they last millennia, but eventually all disintegrate. Mythology and symbolism is not a perfect record-keeping mechanism. It morphs over long epochs, yet it does also preserve a core remnant of the original thought process. Clearly this works, or we wouldn't see serpent mythology on a global scale, or knowledge of a mysterious group known in antiquity as the Shining Ones touch every corner of the planet. Eventually, patriarchy took control of the planet literally, most certainly from the time of the Romans onwards. Knowledge of the Shining Ones and their wisdom was effectively cleansed. The church tried to erase everything they could from history, at least from public view. The Book of Enoch contains valuable information on the Shining Ones, the major reason why it was excluded from the Bible. It's a fact that the church denied the world any knowledge of the work's true content for over 1,000 years. As we've already seen, the majority of biblical source material comes from Mesopotamia, the Gilgamesh flood epic, Abraham's Ziggurat of Ur, Armenia, the land of Noah, the Garden of Eden, serpents, forbidden knowledge, to name a popular few. When the last great Mesopotamia culture died out with Alexander the Great conquering Persia, so did a lineage of knowledge. Enter the Greco-Roman period civilization. The Shining One's Mesopotamian regional name was Anuna. Today they are more popularly known as the Anunnaki, although there are many other variations. This group of deities appears in the mythological traditions of the ancient Sumerians, Akkadians, Assyrians, and Babylonians. Descriptions of how many Anunnaki there were and what role they fulfilled are inconsistent and often contradictory. In the earliest Sumerian writings discussing the Anunna comes from the post-Akkadian period. The Anunna are the most powerful deities in the pantheon, descendants of Anu, the god of the heavens, and their primary function is popularly accepted as decreeing the fates of humanity. Anu in Akkadian, or An in Sumerian, literally mean sky, heaven. It's the divine personification of the sky, supreme god, and ancestor of all the deities in ancient Mesopotamian religion. Anu was believed to be the supreme source of all authority for the other gods and for all mortal rulers, and he's described in one text as the one who contains the entire universe. He is identified with the North Ecliptic Pole centered in Draco, and along with his sons Enlil and Enki, constitutes the highest divine triad, personifying the three bands of constellations of the vault of the sky. By the time of the earliest written records, Anu was rarely worshipped, and the veneration was instead devoted to his son Enlil. But throughout Mesopotamian history, the highest deity in the pantheon was always said to possess the Anutu, meaning Anu power. Anu's primary role in myths is as the ancestor of the Anunnaki, the major deities of Sumerian religion. His primary cult center was the Eanna Temple in the city of Uruk, but by the Akkadian period, his authority in Uruk had largely been ceded to the goddess Inanna, the Queen of Heaven. Anu's consort in the earliest Sumerian texts is the goddess Uris, but she's later the goddess Ki, and in Akkadian texts, the goddess Antu, whose name is the feminine form of Anu. Anu briefly appears in the Akkadian epic of Gilgamesh, in which his daughter Ishtar, the East Semitic equivalent to Inanna, persuades him to give her the Bull of Heaven so that she may send it to attack Gilgamesh. The incident results in the death of Enkidu, who becomes the driving force for the remaining portion of the epic. In another legend, Anu summons the mortal hero Adapa before him for breaking the wing of the south wind. Anu orders Adapa to be given the food of water and immortality, which Adapa refuses, having been warned beforehand by Enki that Anu would offer him the food and water of death. In ancient Hittite religion, Anu is a former ruler of the gods, who was overthrown by his son Kumarbi. Teshub overthrew Kumarbi, avenged Anu's mutilation, and became the new king of the gods. In the Sumerian epic Inanna's descent into the netherworld, the Anunnaki Shining Ones are portrayed as 7 judges who sit before the throne of Erechtheion in the underworld. Later Akkadian texts such as the Epic of Gilgamesh follow this portrayal. During the Old Babylonian period, the Anunnaki were believed to be the chthonic deities of the underworld, while the gods of the heavens were known as the Igigi. The ancient Hittites identified the Anunnaki as the oldest generation of gods who had been overthrown and banished to the underworld by the younger gods. The name Anunnaki is derived from An, the Sumerian god of the sky. The name is variously written Danuna, Danunakene, Danun-na, meaning princely offspring or offspring of Anu. The Anunnaki were believed to be the offspring of An and his consort, the earth goddess Ki. Assyriologist Samuel Noah Kramer identifies Ki with the Sumerian mother goddess Ninhursag, stating that they were originally the same figure. The oldest of the Anunnaki was Enlil, the god of air and chief god of the Sumerian pantheon. The Sumerians believed that until Enlil was born, heaven and earth were inseparable. Then Enlil cleaved heaven and earth in two and carried away the earth, while his father Anu carried away the sky. The Anunnaki are chiefly mentioned in literary texts, and very little evidence to support the existence of any cult of them has yet been unearthed. This is likely because each member of the Anunnaki had his or her individual cult separate from the others. Similarly, no representations of the Anunnaki as a group have yet been discovered, although a few depictions of its individual members have been identified. Deities in Mesopotamia were almost exclusively anthropomorphic. They were thought to possess extraordinary powers and were often envisioned as being of tremendous physical size. The deities typically wore melum, an ambiguous substance which covered them in terrifying splendor. Melum could also be worn by heroes, kings, giants, and even demons. The effect that seeing a deity's melum has on a human is described as ni, a word for the physical tingling of the flesh. Deities were almost always depicted wearing horned caps, consisting of up to 7 superimposed pairs of ox horns. They were also sometimes depicted wearing clothes with elaborate decorative gold and silver ornaments sewn into them. The ancient Mesopotamians believed that their deities lived in heaven, but that a god's statue was a physical embodiment of the god himself. As such, cult statues were given constant care and attention, and a set of priests were assigned to tend to them. These priests would clothe the statues and place feasts before them so they could eat. A deity's temple was believed to be that deity's literal place of residence. The gods had boats, full-size barges, which were normally stored inside their temple and were used to transport their cult statues along waterways during various religious festivals. The gods also had chariots, which were used for transporting their cult statues by land. Sometimes a deity's statue would be transported to the location of a battle so that the deity could watch the battle unfold. The major deities of Mesopotamian pantheon, which include the Anunnaki, were believed to participate in the assembly of the gods, through which gods made all their decisions. This assembly was a divine counterpart to the semi-democratic legislative system that existed during the Third Dynasty of Ur, circa 2112 BC to 2004 BC. The earliest known usages of the term Anunnaki come from the inscriptions written during the reign of Gudea, 2144 to 2124 BC, and the Third Dynasty of Ur. In the earliest texts, the term is applied to the most powerful and important deities in the Sumerian pantheon, the descendants of the sky god An. This group of deities probably includes the 7 gods who decree: An, Enlil, Enki, Ninhursag, Nana, Utu, and Inanna. Although certain deities are described as members of the Anunnaki, no complete list of the names of all the Anunnaki has survived, and they're usually only referred to as a cohesive group in literary texts. Furthermore, Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki inconsistently and do not agree on how many Anunnaki there were or what their divine function was. Originally, the Anunnaki appear to have been heavenly deities with immense powers. In the poem Enki and the World Order, the Anunnaki do homage to Enki, sing hymns of praise in his honor, and take up their dwellings among the people of Sumer. The same composition repeatedly states that the Anunnaki decree the fates of mankind. Time and fate deities are personifications of time, often in the sense of human lifetime and human fate in polytheistic religions. In monotheism, time can be personified as in Father Time in European folklore or in Persian Zoroastrian tradition. Virtually every major deity in the Sumerian pantheon was regarded as the patron of a specific city and was expected to protect that city's interest. The deity was believed to permanently reside within the city's temple. One text mentions as many as 50 Anunnaki associated with the city of Eridu. In Inanna's descent into the netherworld, there are only 7 Anunnaki who reside within the underworld and serve as judges. Inanna stands trial before them for her attempt to take over the underworld. They deem her guilty of hubris and condemn her to death. Major deities in Sumerian mythology were associated with specific celestial bodies. Inanna was believed to be the planet Venus. Utu was believed to be the sun. Nanna was the moon. An was identified with all the stars in the equatorial sky, Enlil with those of the northern sky, and Enki with those in the southern sky. The path of Enlil's celestial orbit was a continuous, symmetrical circle around the north celestial pole, but those of An and Enki were believed to intersect at various points. Akkadian texts of the 2nd millennium BC follow similar portrayals of the Anunnaki from Inanna's descent into the netherworld, depicting them as chthonic underworld deities. In an abbreviated Akkadian version of Inanna's descent, written in the early 2nd millennium, Erechtheion, the queen of the underworld, comments that she drinks water with the Anunnaki. Later in the same poem, Erechtheion offers her servant Namtar to fetch the Anunnaki from Algalgina, to decorate the threshold steps with coral, and to seat them on golden thrones. In Mesopotamian mythology, Erechtheion literally means Queen of the Great Earth, was the goddess of Kur, the land of the dead or underworld, in Sumerian mythology. In later East Semitic myths, she was said to rule Irkalla alongside her husband Nergal. Sometimes her name is given as Irkalla, like the way the name Hades was given in Greek mythology for both the underworld and its ruler, and sometimes it's given as Ninkigal, literally Great Lady of the Earth or Lady of the Great Earth. In Sumerian texts, Erechtheion was the only one who could pass judgment and give laws in her kingdom. The main temple dedicated to her was in Kutha. In the ancient Sumerian poem Inanna's Descent to the Underworld, Erechtheion is described as Inanna's older sister. The two main myths involving Erechtheion are the story of Inanna's descent into the underworld and the story of Erechtheion's marriage to the god Nergal. In ancient Sumerian mythology, Erechtheion is the queen of the underworld. She's the older sister of the goddess Inanna. Inanna and Erechtheion represent polar opposites. Inanna is the queen of heaven, but Erechtheion is the queen of Irkalla. Erechtheion plays a very prominent and significant role in two myths, most notably Inanna's descent into the underworld. In the poem, the goddess Inanna descends into the underworld, apparently seeking to extend her powers there. Erechtheion is Inanna's older sister. When Neti, the gatekeeper of the underworld, informs Erechtheion that Inanna is at the gates of the underworld, demanding to be let in, Erechtheion responds by ordering Neti to bolt the 7 gates of the underworld and to open each gate separately, but only after Inanna has removed one article of clothing. Inanna proceeds through each gate, removing one article of clothing at each gate. Finally, once she's gone through all 7 gates, she finds herself naked and powerless, standing before the throne of Erechtheion. These 7 judges of the underworld judge Inanna and declare her to be guilty. Inanna's minister, Ninshubur, however, pleads with Enki, and Enki agrees to rescue Inanna from the underworld. Enki sends 2 sexless beings down to the underworld to revive Inanna with the blood and water of life. These sexless beings escort Inanna up from the underworld, but a horde of angry demons follow Inanna back up from the underworld, demanding to take someone else down to the underworld as Inanna's replacement. When Inanna discovers that her husband, Dumuzid, has not mourned her death, she becomes ireful towards him and orders the demons to take Dumuzid as her replacement. The other myth is the story of Nergal, the plague god. Once the gods held a banquet that Erechtheion, as queen of the underworld, could not come up to attend. They invited her to send a messenger, and she sent her vizier, Namtar, in her place. He was treated well by all, but for the exception of being disrespected by Nergal. Because of this, Nergal was banished to the kingdom controlled by the goddess. Versions vary at this point, but all of them result in him becoming her husband. In later tradition, Nergal is said to have been the victor, taking her as wife and ruling the land himself. It's theorized that the story of Inanna's descent is told to illustrate the possibility of an escape from the underworld, where the Nergal myth is intended to reconcile the existence of two rulers of the underworld, a goddess and a god. The addition of Nergal represents the harmonizing tendency to unite Erechtheion as the queen of the underworld with the god who, as god of war and pestilence, brings death to the living, and thus becomes the one who presides over the dead. In some versions of the myths, Erechtheion rules the underworld by herself, but in other versions of the myth, Erechtheion rules alongside a husband subordinate to her named Gugulana. In his book Sumerian Mythology, a study of spiritual and literacy achievement in the 3rd millennium BC, the renowned scholar of ancient Sumer, Samuel Noah Kramer, writes that according to the introductory passage of the ancient Sumerian epic poem Gilgamesh Enkidu and the Underworld, Erechtheion was forcibly abducted, taken down to the underworld by Kur, and was forced to become queen of the underworld against her will. To avenge the abduction of Erechtheion, Enki, the god of water, set out in a boat to slay the Kur. The Kur defends itself by pelting Enki with rocks of many sizes and by sending the waves beneath Enki's boat to attack Enki. The poem never actually explains who the ultimate victor of the battle is, but it's implied that Enki wins. In Hittite mythology, the sun goddess of the earth rules as an underworld deity. Though the deity is of likely Proto-Indo-European origin, this is an aspect thought to have been influenced by Erechtheion. In later times, the Greeks and Romans appear to have syncretized Erechtheion with their own goddess Hecate. In the heading of a spell in the Michigan Magical Papyrus, which has been dated to the late 3rd or early 4th century AD, Hecate is referred to as Hecate Erechtheion and is invoked using magical words and gestures to alleviate the caster's fear of punishment in the afterlife. During the Old Babylonian period, circa 1830 BC to 1531 BC, a new set of deities known as the Igigi are introduced. The relationship between Anunnaki and the Igigi is unclear. On some occasions, the categories appear to be used synonymously, but in other writings, such as the Poem of Era, there's a clear distinction between the two. In the late Akkadian Atrahasis epic, the Igigi are the 6th generation of the gods who are forced to perform labor for the Anunnaki. After 40 days, the Igigi rebel, and the god Enki, one of the Anunnaki, creates humans to replace them. Era, sometimes called Ira, is an Akkadian plague god known for an epos of 8th century BCE. Era is the god of mayhem and pestilence who's responsible for periods of political confusion. In that epic that's given the modern title Era, the writer Kabti Ilani Marduk, a descendant, he says of Dabibi, presents himself in a colophon, following the text as simply the transcriber of a visionary dream in which Era himself revealed the text. The poem opens with an invocation. The god Era is sleeping fitfully with his consort, identified with Mamidum and not with the other goddess, Mami, but is roused by his advisor Isum and the 7 Sibiti or Sibeti, who are sons of heaven and earth. Champions without peer is the repeated formula, and each are assigned a destructive destiny by Anu. The Sibiti call on Era to lead the destruction of mankind. Isum tries to mollify Era's weakened violence to no avail. Foreign people invade Babylonia but are struck down by plague. Even Marduk, the patron of Babylon, relinquishes his throne to Era for a time. Tablets 2 and 3 are occupied with a debate between Era and Isum. Era goes to battle in Babylon, Sippar, Uruk, Dur-Kurigalzu, and Der. The world is turned upside down. Righteous and unrighteous are killed alike. Era orders Isum to complete the work by defeating Babylon's enemies. Then the god withdraws to his own seat in Emislam with the terrifying 7, and mankind is saved. A proprietary prayer ends the work. The poem must have been central to Babylonian culture. At least 36 copies have been recovered from 5 first millennium sites: Assur, Babylon, Nineveh, Sultan Tepe, and Ur. More even than have been recovered of the Epic of Gilgamesh. The text appears to some readers to be a mythologization of historic turmoil in Mesopotamia, though scholars disagree as to the historic events that inspired the poem. The poet explains, Tablet 4:3, "You changed out your divinity and made yourself like a man." The Era text soon assumes magical functions. Parts of the text were inscribed on amulets employed for exorcism and as prophylactic against the plague. The 7 are known from a range of Akkadian incantation texts. Their demonic names vary, but their number 7 is invariable. The 5 tablets containing the era epos were first published in 1956 with an improved text based on additional finds appearing in 1969. Perhaps 70% of the poem has been recovered. The consonance of the purely mythic 7 led by Era echoes with the Egyptian 7 against Thebes, widely assumed by Hellenists to have had a historical basis. From the Middle Babylonian period, circa 1592 to 1155 BC, onward, the name Anunnaki was applied generally to the deities of the underworld, whereas the name Igigi was applied to the heavenly deities. During this period, the underworld deities Damkina, Nergal, and Madanu are listed as the most powerful among the Anunnaki, alongside Marduk, the national god of ancient Babylon. In the standard Akkadian Epic of Gilgamesh, circa 1200 BC, Utnapishtim, the immortal survivor of the Great Flood, describes the Anunnaki as 7 judges of the underworld, who set the land aflame as the storm approaches. Later, when the flood comes, Ishtar, the East Semitic equivalent to Inanna, and the Anunnaki mourn over the destruction of humanity. In the Babylonian Enuma Elish, Marduk assigns the Anunnaki their positions. A late Babylonian version of the epic mentions 600 Anunnaki of the underworld, but only 300 Anunnaki of heaven, indicating the existence of a complex underworld cosmology. In gratitude, the Anunnaki, the great gods, built Asagila, a splendid temple dedicated to Marduk, Ea, and Enlil. In the 8th century BC poem of Era, the Anunnaki are described as the brothers of the god Nergal and are depicted as antagonistic towards humanity. A badly damaged text from the Neo-Assyrian period, 911 to 612 BC, describes Marduk leading his army of Anunnaki in the sacred city of Nippur and causing a disturbance. The disturbance causes a flood, which forces the resident gods of Nippur to take shelter in the Eshu-Mesha temple in Ninurta. Enlil is enraged at Marduk's transgression and orders the gods of Eshu-Mesha to take Marduk and the other Anunnaki as prisoners. The Anunnaki are captured, but Marduk appoints his frontrunner, Mush-Tesh-Ir-Hablim, to lead a revolt against the gods of Eshu-Mesha and send his messenger, Neratagmil, to alert Nabu, the god of literacy. When the Eshu-Mesha gods hear Nabu speak, they come out of their temple to search for him. Marduk defeats the Eshu-Mesha gods and takes 360 of them as prisoners of war, including Enlil himself. Enlil protests that the Eshu-Mesha gods are innocent, so Marduk puts them on trial before the Anunnaki. The text ends with a warning from Damkiana, another name for Ninursag, to the gods and to humanity, pleading them not to repeat the war between the Anunnaki and the gods of Eshu-Mesha. When we look at the ancient Hittite examples, Mesopotamian Anunnaki. In the mythologies of the Hurrians and the Hittites, which flourished in the mid to late 2nd millennium BC, the oldest generation of gods was believed to have been banished by the younger gods to the underworld, where they were ruled by the goddess Lelwani. Hittite scribes identified these deities with the Anunnaki. In ancient Hurrian, the Anunnaki are referred to as Karyuls Sayuns, which means former ancient gods, or Kateris Sayuns, which means gods of the earth. Hittite and Hurrian treaties were often sworn by the old gods to ensure that the oaths would be kept. In one myth, the gods are threatened by the stone giant Ilikumi, so Ea, the later name for Enki, commands the former gods to find the weapon that was used to separate the heavens from earth. Although the names of the Anunnaki in Hurrian and Hittite texts frequently vary, they are always 8 in number. In one Hittite ritual, the names of the old gods are listed as Aduntari the diviner, Zulki the dream interpreter, Irpitia, lord of the earth, Nara, Namsara, Minki, Amunki, and Api. The old gods had no identifiable cult in the Hurrio-Hittite religion. Instead, the Hurrians and Hittites sought to communicate with the old gods through the ritual sacrifice of a piglet in a pit dug in the ground. The old gods were often invoked to perform ritual purifications. The Hittite account of the old gods' banishment to the underworld ultimately became the source for the Greek poet Hesiod's narrative of the overthrow of the Titans by the Olympians in his Theogony. The Greek sky god Uranos, whose name means heaven, is the father of the Titans and is derived from the Hittite version of Anu. In Hesiod's account, Uranos is castrated by his son Kronos, just as Anu was castrated by his son Kumarbi in the Hittite story. Over time, because of the scientific knowledge, technological and spiritual wisdom, and often alleged extrasensory abilities, they came to be thought of as gods, sons and daughters of the gods, by the less developed people who lived peacefully beside them. These shining ones were said repeatedly to have civilized humankind, perhaps following a global catastrophe. Most mainstream historians do not take seriously either the existence of this mysterious godlike culture or the global catastrophe, even though many individual researchers have concluded otherwise. These shining ones also embraced a rebel group known in legend as the Fallen Ones, fallen angels or watchers, who are recorded as having married and reproduced outside their own kind, their hybrid offspring being known as Nephilim and described as giants. The story goes that the catastrophe that nearly wiped out humanity as a great deluge due to the wrath of God, or rather the wrath of Elohim or Shining Ones, who somehow initiated it to destroy the rebels and their hybrid offspring. Although fleeting references to the Shining Ones can be found in the Old Testament, there's much more about them in the Book of Enoch, an ancient work that was omitted from the Bible. The Shining Ones were held in such awe by later generations that they were revered as deities and linked with the heavens. They appear independently in many mythologies of Europe, notably Irish, Finnish, Norse, and Greek. Over millennia, the Shining Ones, or at least knowledge of them, turned into brotherhoods or priesthoods, well versed in the propaganda skills needed to maintain both religious and political authority. Many of the world's unexplained mysteries in ancient cultures point to the Shining Ones, not just Mesopotamia, revolving around the core belief of their advanced scientific and metaphysical knowledge. Ollantaytambo and the incredible megaliths. One of the greatest mysteries of the past is the enigma of the great megalithic builders. How they were able to build these enormous structures, why do similar megalithic structures appear all over the world, and did the ancients build these structures with primitive tools, or did they use some sort of highly developed technology similar to our own modern-day technology? Engineers all over the planet are fascinated by the enigma of the megalith builders. Yet archaeology has it all explained away with copper chisels, which nowadays just doesn't wash anymore. People want answers to the methods they may have used, whether ingeniously simple or highly complicated. Whether highly advanced ancient technology or lost ancient techniques, we just can't comprehend. Cusco in Peru and nearby Pumapunku in Bolivia are two such places that hold many of the answers to some of the puzzling enigmas of ancient megalithic engineering. Tiwanaku features enormous stonework that the ancients created with high precision at a difficult altitude. Machu Picchu, the icon of Peru, is only one such place where amazing enigmas with giant megalithic blocks, perfectly cut and articulated what can only be perceived to be the awe-inspiring megaliths of Ollantaytambo. If anyone plans an archaeological visit to Peru, the three sites they put on the list include Machu Picchu, Sayhuite, and Ollantaytambo. In the popular culture, it seems that Machu Picchu remains the most enigmatic and interesting to tourists looking for something mysterious and unique. Ollantaytambo exists merely as a place to get on the train to head to that lost city. However, a closer look is warranted, as this location offers a view of interesting aspects of Inca and pre-Inca megalithic building. Many engineers flock to Ollantaytambo to see evidence of the work that was done in these huge polygonal walls that simply looks impossible. Many are now calling them pre-cataclysmic walls that don't match any known building technique concept. It's impossible that bronze tools were used, and it's by far one of the best examples of the stone most likely having been softened or in some kind of cold plasma state when it was applied. The seams or joints are very strange, following very difficult curves that would have to be somehow engineered. To have this perfect of a fit, you can imagine if these two stones were already there and had been placed, and this was softened right when it was placed on top, the weight of the material would have basically squashed the material along the joints. Then when you contemplate that it's not just two joints, but the wall is produced to perfection, meeting 3 or 4 stones simultaneously. There are no known tools that can maneuver the large polygonal material. It's just not feasible with today's technology, and it cannot happen with people chiseling. Suggesting it could happen is preposterous if you've seen the pieces so they fit together so perfectly. We see lichen growing on these blocks, which takes eons to grow, but you can see how good the joints were before it eroded. You can even see or imagine the change in texture between the surface and the joints. It's like when it was soft, somebody came along and just smushed it outright. And you can see the stones in between. The stones like it's fused. It's like it's fused between the stones. Looking at all this, it's no wonder why people are so obsessed to figure it out. How is it done? Why was it done? And what technology did they possess? Let's begin with what we know about this mysterious place, Ollantaytambo. Ollantaytambo can be loosely translated as a place to see down, which may have a similar meaning to a watchtower or overlook, combined with the Quechua word for a storehouse or inn. Many stories surround the founding of this town and its takeover by different people throughout the history of the Inca civilization. It might have been constructed much earlier and rebuilt by the Pachacutec when it took over. Most of the megalithic structures found there are supposedly the responsibility of these people. Another possibility for the meaning of the name seems to indicate that a hero named Ollanta, who has many stories passed down orally as most Inca stories are. This strong warrior rose to power and prestige by not only being a brave fighter, but by also having a clandestine affair with the royal princess. A man of his station would not be legally allowed to marry into the royal family. Due to this slight and inability to be with the woman he loved, Ollanta supposedly raised up a rebel group to launch a fight that lasted nearly 10 years. The story continues to describe his capture after he was tricked into coming into the city under false pretenses. Before Ollantaytambo got its name because of this story, it was called Pakal, which means either the House of Windows or House of the Dawn. Although the name is quite similar, the place has nothing to do with Pakal, which is a later town near Cusco. Unfortunately, some historians and tour guides get this wrong and claim that the latter location was the birthplace of Inca civilization, when it was actually founded after the Spanish came to the shores. The false information actually comes from Spanish journals created by one Sarmiento, who wrote about this smaller town in the 1570s. When scholars took a closer look, they realized that this was either a mistake or a false story designed to keep the true Inca story to the people themselves and not allow the Spanish to know all their secrets. The real House of the Dawn has always lay in Ollantaytambo instead. The stories surrounding this unique place go in many different directions. Due to its importance back near the beginning of Inca society, it may have had more importance than Cusco did itself. It may also have existed before the capital city was built or chosen as the main location. A book by Salazar's, The Cusco and the Sacred Valley of Peru, writes that a great leader appeared after a large flood and came to Cusco after having been in Tambo and talking to the people there. Chanupa or Vicorchian's knowledge was engraved on a staff and given to the people of that region. The story continues in the 1600s with Joan de Santa Cruz Pachacuti's tale of Chanupa's staff magically turning into gold for a new royal baby in the Tambo city. This man, called Manco Capac, carried the golden staff up the mountain and found Cusco himself. Both of these stories indicate that Ollantaytambo was the birthplace of the Inca society, instead of some place called Tiwanaku, which is another popular choice for the origin story. This idea is also backed up by Vaca de Castro in the 1540s. This is considered one of the earliest Spanish writings about Cusco and how the Inca came to be. The general story indicated that Manco Capac came from the sun directly, climbed out of the window of a great house, climbed up the mountain, and founded the city of Cusco. It speaks of the Sacred Valley, a journey past the great river that flows through it, and an arrival at Tambo after leaving the shores of Titicaca. The progress, once arriving at Ollantaytambo, seems to begin in the basement of the House of Windows, journeys upward through the house until the man finally emerges from an upper window. The so-called house is really quite a much larger structure that includes the pyramid-shaped terracing of the entire hill. This is not part of any regular tour for visitors of Ollantaytambo. For the most part, these old stories are not part of the ordinary historical record, and the house structure is not clear or even thought to exist. The stories do match the structure, however, in that the winter solstice sun shines quite brightly through the upper window. This symbolizes the emergence of Manco Capac and forms a large part of Inca spiritual beliefs and sun worship. Interpretations of the story and the positioning of the sun in relation to this house change from one historian to the next. For Salazar, it seems obvious that the sun shining through the window indicates how their focus of worship illuminates the earth and delivers heroes to them. The House of the Dawn both speaks of the beginning of the day when the sun rises and also the beginning of Inca civilization when the sons of the sun rose to power in the region. Many people do not agree that Ollantaytambo was the original site of importance for the Inca people, instead of the more well-known Cusco. It's not as impressive visually, does not seem to be as well thought out or planned, but it is older and has many features that match the stories of the Inca origins. In general, the Inca civilization is believed to have existed from around 1100 to 1533 CE when the Spanish arrived. In that time, more than 100 rulers existed, which has been documented by one Juha Hiltunen. He records Manco Capac as the 6th king in the succession, although there are 4 other people by that name listed throughout history. Just as modern-day royals or important families frequently named their offspring after great ancestors from the past, apparently the Inca did too. This does not mean that every Manco Capac was in the same family line. The name simply carried a lot of prestige and respect among the people. Other more subjective factors in the idea that Ollantaytambo is the birthplace of Inca civilization come from its massive size, position, and structures. It's one of the largest areas that covers over 600 hectares. Its agricultural terraces are some of the largest in Peru. Records exist of unique farming activities that produced new types of seeds given to the Sapa Inca rulers as gifts. Already, unique stonework is visible along the trail past the terraces. This path is one of the places where evidence of instruction in different times and possibly by different people exists. The stones on the left seem to have come from the Temple of the Sun originally. They have unusual shapes with precise angles and joints. These left-hand walls show considerably more advanced or skillful stone cutting than the ones on the right. This is one of the most easily compared spots that allows visitors to see how the stone cutting ability changed over the years. The left has multifaceted rocks that fit with no space between them, while the right has ordinary rocks positioned with mortar. As you continue up the staircases, even more mysterious changes come to light. At the top of the climb, the walls have trapezoidal niches carved into them. These are commonly seen throughout Inca architecture as places for perhaps urns or statuary. A trapezoid-shaped door is topped by Inca stonework that does not show the precision of the rest of the wall. The Temple of the Sun has simply massive andesite stones as part of its construction. These are estimated to weigh more than 40 tons each, and many people wonder how they were put in place originally. At the top of what many people call Inca thrones, which are merely platforms with armrests, they could have been used as seats for royalty or other important people for ceremonies or other purposes. If you sit there, you get quite an impressive view of the mountain and valley beyond. In fact, the Pinkuyuna mountain features an Inca-built structure that would be visible from the thrones if you use a pair of binoculars or a telescope. Other smaller buildings are scattered around it. The most intriguing feature that would be visible from the thrones is a massive face formed by a combination of natural mountain features and some refinement by human hands. The stories indicate that this is a profile of Tunapa, the great teacher who passed down his knowledge to the early Inca people within the sacred valley. He walked across the land carrying a staff, wearing a long robe and sporting a beard. Some stories indicate that his skin was quite pale, but some historians believe this was an addition put in place by the Spanish in an attempt to set themselves up in a place of power when they arrived there. Tunapa was also called Viracochan, which should not be confused with Viracocha, the creator god. Again, some stories attempt to create a correlation between the two, but most are quite separate. Viracocha existed before the Inca mythology adopted him as their main deity. Sometimes his name is also spelled Wiracocha, and he can go by other names as well. He created the world, the sun and the moon, the oceans, and everything that makes up all material and beings on earth. The face of Viracochan, or Tunapa, is not associated with this god. Instead, it's the man or teacher that supposedly founded the Inca civilization. He's a pilgrim, a superhuman with special knowledge, an astronomer, and one who understands time. The people who helped carve the face and construct the buildings on the mountain created a sanctuary that sits atop the head as a type of crown. From certain perspectives, which the builders would have had from their lofty prominences, it appears that this important man gazed directly across at the Temple of the Condor. In the Inca art, Tunapa sometimes has features similar to a serpent or a bird, which are even more prominent in the Maya and Aztec traditions, who believed in Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl, respectively. As it's seen in many ancient civilizations, one borrowed information and ideas from the next to fill in the gaps in their belief systems and histories. When so many groups exist around the same time and locations, it makes sense that they would share some cultural aspects. Buildings and structures up the mountain would have taken a lot of effort, a very large labor force, and a long time. The stones could have come from the mountain above or across the river from quarries. The Temple of the Sun, which is made primarily from pink granite, was never completely finished. The quarry was only about 4 kilometers away. When compared with some distances that rocks removed or other construction projects, this seems like a relatively short distance. However, in the ancient world with no wheels or beasts of burden, this distance is quite far enough to affect the rate of building. There's no indication that the construction of the temple stopped because they ran out of time or labor. Why it was never finished remains a mystery. The most common understanding is that the Spanish arrived and things like building fancy temples became of limited importance in an attempt to survive and protect themselves from the invaders. An interesting thing to note is the assortment of tired stones that stand between the quarry and the building site. These were probably abandoned in place when the construction was halted to focus on other things. Different suppositions have been made over the years about how the rocks were cut, transported, and worked into position. Some suggest that the first boulder was shaped and placed, the next was suspended on wooden scaffolding while it was carved to fit the perfect shape below, and then it was lowered down into place gradually. The precise work may have used straight pieces of wood or hanging strings with weighted bottoms to act as measurement tools that would trace the outline. They could have knocked larger pieces off stones first with their hammers before scraping and chipping with even smaller stones to get the final precise shape. Transporting the boulders would have been enough of a challenge in itself. All of these questions have no definitive answers even today. Historians do know that the Inca used stone hammers and bronze chisels to do the work. However, they do not seem sufficient to work with the exceptionally hard andesite or granite that made up many of the structures. These ideas simply will not work because the tools are not hard enough to make the changes to the rocks needed for the precise joints. How can a relatively soft stone hammer smooth out a giant stone without getting destroyed in the process? The answer to this question has interested historians and architects for many years. One such man, named Jean-Pierre Pratzen, tried to mimic the Inca stone carving methods and wrote about them in the late 1880s for Scientific American. He surmised that the Inca had a simply massive workforce who did not view time and an average workday the same way that the Spanish would when they arrived. He also suggested that the Inca would simply try out a series of river rocks or other different types of stones from the mountains to see what would work best at chipping and polishing the large boulders. These ideas don't seem to have any true basis in fact. While there's no doubt that the Inca civilization had a lot of people in it at its height, we do not know how large their workforce could have been in these early years near Ollantaytambo. Also, what did he mean by no concept of time or an average workday? Undoubtedly, people still slept at night and worked during the day. There's plenty of evidence that shows the Inca people understood seasons as well. Stone hammers and random river rocks could not have shaped pink granite from the mountains into the massive half-dozen slabs that still stand as part of the Temple of the Sun today. They consist not only of massive pieces that would have been very difficult to move into place, but also smaller slabs in between them that fit nearly perfectly. No one could have done this work with the bronze chisel or hand-sized rock. If someone attempted to do this kind of work with these tools, it would have taken an exceptionally long amount of time, and the whole region around the mountain and Ollantaytambo would have been littered with bronze chisel remnants or broken stone hammers. When you look at precision, the nearly earthquake-proof construction techniques of layering the granite and the tired stones abandoned on the way from the quarry to the mountain, the overall picture seems to indicate that the project was started by someone before the Inca and stopped not when the Spanish arrived, but due to some cataclysmic event that destroyed an understanding of different types of tools and methods. The seeming importance of the methods used to create walls that would withstand many tremors may indicate that the people who built them experienced more earthquakes in their time than usually happen in that region of Peru today. While any earthquake could be catastrophic to a relatively primitive society, just as it is to people today, if they were exceptionally rare, new construction techniques may not have been developed. However, when you look at the walls of the temple or any other structure created in and around Ollantaytambo, you see that they have unique features that would particularly make them safer in the event of an earthquake. It obviously worked, as they still stand today. Of course, not everything is in pristine condition from its original placement. Two walls of the temple appear to have fallen or crashed down at some point. The other two walls were reinforced behind with earth, which obviously served as some sort of protection against any tremor or other natural disasters that would have befallen the mountain. Likewise, the fallen or tired stones were not left in a convenient pile as if the workers placed them before moving on to other purposes. Instead, they were scattered or tumbled across the landscape as if they fell due to an earthquake or other catastrophe. One of the most obvious explanations for this time of tumultuous upheaval and many more earthquakes and natural disasters than normal were to come from the end of the last ice age over 10,000 years ago. This period changed the climate, sea levels, and much more about the Earth in sudden and often disastrous ways. If a civilization existed here before then, it's quite possible that they were destroyed due to the upheaval and associated catastrophes. Their building methods may have been lost forever, and then when the Inca showed up, remained forgotten in favor of much easier and tool-friendly construction techniques. From the Temple of the Sun, no other gigantic megaliths exist. There are plenty of examples of Inca architecture itself. The Temple of the Condor is one example. The two-dimensional pyramid that appears three-dimensional from one particular spot is another. This optical illusion is most obvious from the Sun Gate or Intipunku. The early adventurers, the Salazars who were mentioned above, identified the pyramid illusions when they explored the area around the Temple of the Sun many years ago. The deliberate construction involves two massive walls that align with the river in the valley and the Inca Road. The third side of the pyramid does not really exist. Instead, it's an illusion created by the surrounding fields and lay of the land. Combined with fields constructed lower than the ones around them, so that the solstice sun casts the pyramid's shadow approximately on the ground, indicates an extremely precise and time-consuming project. There is no doubt that the sun factored into all Incan beliefs and spirituality in a big way. They considered themselves the children of the sun, and that a sunbeam turned to a man began their entire civilization, to put the origin story very simply. It makes sense that one of the earliest buildings would be called the Temple of the Sun, and that the surrounding structures and landscape would be manipulated to glorify it. This location would act as not only a spiritual or religious center, but also a place to formalize the succession of one Sapa Inca, or royal ruler, to the next. If the journals of Fernando de Montesinos are accurate, most of these rulers seem to hold power for approximately 25 years, since there were 100 of them listed. Again, if this is true, the temple, pyramid, and other buildings may have existed for over 2 millennia before Cusco was built. Of equal interest and importance is the Temple of the Condor on the western side of Ollantaytambo. A path still remains that leads from the Temple of the Sun to the one that focuses on the avian symbol of the heavens for the Inca people. As mentioned previously, the Inca had an idea of 3 planes of existence: heaven, the world where people live, and the underworld. The condor is the symbol of the sky and the heavens, which makes sense since great birds would soar almost out of sight overhead. After traversing this path between the temples, climb down a few stairs, passing a large andesite wall with various strange features not found anywhere else in the area. These stones have protrusions or knobs that are carved out and aligned with notches that are carved into the stones below them. The uniqueness of these features presents another mystery in the massive collection of mysteries about Inca and megalithic building. First of all, as this hard stone wall uses the precise shaping techniques found elsewhere, it's unlikely that the Inca themselves created it. However, it's unknown why the early builders would have made these particular stones with knobs and niches. Some hypotheses include the idea that they were used to lift up the stones either by hand or with ropes. But it does not seem to make sense because more stones would have these too. Others suggest that the sun at the solstice would hit these knobs just so and create either a pattern or a shadowy pointer to the niches or some other important feature that's currently unknown. In fact, the Salazar book seems to indicate that the summer and winter solstices did cast shadows towards the corresponding niches in the other stones. This may have simply been a decorative feature focused on sun worship. If you continue down this path and go around the corner, you come to what some historians call a quarry. However, this is simply not a place where andesite was removed from the ground. Yes, there are blocks carved from the bedrock that were probably intended for use in the construction of Ollantaytambo and the surrounding structures. Although erosion seems to indicate that they're newer than other stones used in the temples and walls. These exquisite carving techniques still seem impossible for the Inca with their stone and bronze tools. Mundane archaeologists credit the Inca with these and all other stone cutting and construction in the area. Still, logic dictates that they would not be able to do these things. Other locations of the quarry near the Temple of the Condor show rougher cuts and carvings that indicate unfinished projects, or perhaps practice of new techniques or for apprentice stonecutters. Some locations simply have cubes removed from the ground. Others have carefully carved staircase shapes with no purpose or destination. Stones are piled up precisely and fit together with as much precision as seen in the megalithic and other walls below. However, these are more like practice projects than any part of an actual structure. Signs of Inca work exist here too. You can tell the difference because of the perfectionism and intricacy of the earlier carving compared to the rather rough and imprecise style of watch the Inca could do with their softer tools. It seems in many places that the Inca attempted to recreate what the people before them could do, but could not figure out how to do it. This left them with many practice stones and jumbled piles that really served no purpose. The Temple of the Condor was constructed with impressive precision. However, the general bird-like shape was probably due to natural geography. The intelligence of whoever built these two temples, the illusionary pyramid, and all other structures in and around Ollantaytambo cannot be denied. These mysterious people used techniques and tools lost to history before the mighty Inca civilization even showed up. Revelations of the Maya. Everyone feels comfortable with the Maya when talking about Mesoamerican cultures. Indeed, the most commonly known civilization in ancient Mesoamerica are the Maya. The rest are not exactly tangible and are somewhat murky, especially with respect to their origins. However, everything we think we know about the Maya is upturned on its head with the invention of LiDAR technology. They controlled a vast area of what is now Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Belize, and Honduras, predominantly operating in the Yucatan Peninsula. LiDAR scans now reveal the Maya were far bigger and more complex than originally thought. 60,000 structures have been added to the list in just an 800 square mile survey. Archaeologists are now talking pre-LiDAR and post-LiDAR discoveries. The Maya were the most successful civilization in that area before the Spanish conquistadors invaded and wiped out most of them. Although most people simply know them as singular ethnic and cultural group, the term Maya encompasses multiple ethnicities depending on where they came from. Unlike the Olmec, the Maya did not vanish into history in some mysterious fashion. There's a very strong historical record of their cities being abandoned as the population dwindled. Historical researchers point to things like overfarming, environmental collapse, and even volcanic activity as partial reasons for this decline. Eventually, the area was taken over by explorers from Europe, and the Maya assimilated into the new culture. Descendants of these ancient folk still live today. Where did the Mayans come from? Let's look at the Orthodox narrative first. As with all other civilizations on Earth, the Mayans started out as nomadic people with a strong cultural identity as they developed agriculture. Many researchers are now gravitating to the fact they're remnants of the Olmec, or at least preserved Olmec ideas. In that part of the world, it was maize and beans that gave the hunters and gatherers the opportunity to put down roots and establish a stationary home. The place they chose was inhospitable jungle. The incredible task still astonishes many today. The freshwater sinkholes called cenotes are littered all over the Yucatan Peninsula. They also domesticated large turkeys native to Mesoamerica that provided a considerable food source. These first signs of habitation began around 2000 BCE. Even this orthodox narrative, which has been solidified for a century, is now upturned with the Mayan snake king's revelation. El Mirador holds some answers to the Maya and their origins, with a mysterious altar providing insight into these mystery rulers. Nearby Guatemala holds answers to the Snake Kings. Evidence there shows they were lamenting for the very old class system where they came from, that they resurrected it and carried on. Was this a proto-Olmec priest class that collapsed? This was very near the time when the Olmec civilization came into being. Now historians and archaeologists frequently express the idea that the Olmec were the original Mesoamerican civilization at the time. While this is generally true, they didn't exist for exceptionally long, as a structured society before the Aztecs and Maya came along. They were, however, truly the first to create organized cities, cut stones for building purposes, and develop trade routes. The next iteration of Mayan people was part of the Zapotec kingdom. They garnered ideas directly from the Olmec, including ones about culture, religion, astronomy, keeping track of the days using a calendar, and writing. It's interesting to note that while the Olmec did not have a precise language, they did have pictorial codes to record certain things. The archaeological record for them is quite slim. The Maya, however, have quite a rich written history for those with the skills to figure out what their symbols mean. Where did the Mayan people go? By the time the year 0 came and went, the Maya had multiple cities that dominated the Mesoamerican region. Teotihuacan was the name of their dominant city. However, somewhere between 200 and 900 CE, they stopped using this area as the center of government and commerce and expanded out into new areas. Civilization topped out in the millions. Although things like agricultural troubles and natural disasters may explain some of the shifts in Maya civilization, a mystery still surrounds how the largest and most successful Mesoamericans group fell apart so quickly. Around the year 1000 CE, they migrated out of the cities, which were taken over by the Toltec tribe. Although eventual skirmishes between the Spaniards and native people did occur, it was not at all like a great city or kingdom battle depicted in the movies. When the Europeans arrived, they figured the cities were ruins and some other people, and not associated with the Maya at all. The amazingly rich Maya culture. Anyone who has studied Maya civilization before understands how many incredible advancements they made in the fields of astronomy, architecture, mathematics, and more. The amazingly intricate and accurate Mayan calendar, which supposedly foretold the end of the world in the year 2000, is a masterpiece of both art and science. The Maya had a unique form of writing that used what is called tychal glyphs. These are frequently carved or painted blocks of images that mean words, sounds, or ideas. With them, they recorded special events, legends, and tales, and a lot of information about their deities and religious practices. Unfortunately, quite a bit of this was lost when one Bishop Diego de Landa began deciphering the Maya hieroglyphics while summarily trying to destroy any evidence of their heathen ways. By this time, around 1500 CE, the Maya were rather comfortable with the Spanish idea of Christianity. As many other cultural assimilations occur throughout time, the bishop sought to destroy the old ways by specifically destroying language. He burned books, destroyed steles, and tortured believers against the wishes of the church at the time. Oddly enough, his efforts at collecting all this information gives more current historians a lot of insight into the Maya culture. Religious beliefs and practices. Despite the crazed bishop's hellacious efforts to destroy Maya culture and religion, they had already turned mostly to Christianity by the time he began his campaign. The idea the Spanish people shared about Jesus Christ resonated with their own beliefs that life was cyclical and gods and men were born again. In fact, the Mayan maize god, who controlled the growth and regrowth of crops, sounded very much like the new people's idea of how religion worked. To the ancient Maya civilization, far before the Europeans showed up, their religious practices included the strong idea that life and death were just a part of the same journey, and that they would be repeated throughout an individual's existence. Gods and other deities existed to help them in their life, offer protection, maintain the underworld of Xibalba, and the paradise world of Tamawanchan, which was frequently depicted as a mist-shrouded mountain with vibrant flowers and delicious fruits. Prominent deities. Unlike the Olmec, who had mysterious unnamed gods and goddesses, the Maya gods were written about and worshipped quite openly in historical documents, carvings, and other artifacts. Instead of having specific gods for unique things, however, they tended to blend together and borrow characteristics from each other. Therefore, a major god can take on traits of a lesser god whenever they wanted to. They could also take on external traits that worked against the things they already were. Like most things in the Maya culture, the religious beliefs were rather fluid and malleable. The deities could be humanoid, animalistic, or any combination of them both. The uppermost rulers and creators were Itzamna and his wife Ix-Shebel-Yax. They could exist either as humanoid figures or iguanas. Hurakan, mentioned above, also earned the moniker Heart of Heaven, Earth, or the Sky. While the other ones might have created the world, Xibalba and the Misty Sky Mountain, this guy brought the people to life. Other deities followed the same basic understanding as the Olmec gods described earlier. There was a sun god, one of maize, a rain god, one that slings lightning bolts, the goddess of rainbows, and the flatulent one, who's the god of death and rot. Interestingly, rainbows were also associated with rot, disease, and bad luck. The creation of the Maya people. Two important books existed under the modern age that pertain to the ancient Maya people and their beliefs. These included the Popol Vuh and the Chilam Balam. They came from the highland and lowland sections of Mayan society, respectively. The latter is made up of multiple books that describe how things were for various groups of people living in slightly different geographic locations. Inside lies the creation myths for these group of Mayas, as they were around 1500 CE, when they were already influenced by Spaniards coming over to share their own religious ideas. To put it simply, the Mayan creation myth includes the planting of a huge tree of life by Hurakan, the wind and sky god. The tree grew, spread out, and formed Xibalba by the roots, their version of heaven in the upper branches, and the earth around the trunk. Animals and plants came first, and then the people were made to glorify the gods. Similarities between this and the Christian creation myth the Europeans brought over with them seem obvious. The people themselves came about in various ways too. First, gods made people from mud, but they had no mental power, intelligence, or will. They also couldn't move on their own, so the gods decided they had to do better. The next people were made from wood or reeds, depending on their sex. They moved, grew, and thought, but they didn't worship the gods. Also, they kept coming back when they died, like plants frequently do in a seasonal cycle. Finally, the Mayan gods got it right and created thinking, acting, and living people from maize dough and the gods' blood. In order to ensure the people were not too wise like the gods, Hurakan filled their viewpoints and brains with clouds. The Maya people, who still practice the old traditions and religious beliefs, believe that people could be destroyed again if they do not appropriately worship the gods. With the concept of all life exciting in a never-ending cycle, they also believe that some of the new people will come into being at that time. The afterlife, underworld, and paradise. In an almost Greek depiction of hell and heaven, which is commonly shown in Dante's Divine Comedy, the Maya idea of the underworld had 9 levels with tricky demonic creatures trying to destroy you, and 13 levels of climbing the glorious tree of life until you reach the top of the heavenly mountain. They saw death not as a release from toil, damnation, or a blessing, but just another journey to undergo in the cycle of existence. The idea of the underworld came with its own legend too. The hero twins were told of in the Popol Vuh, and thus Xibalba, an underworld full of trials and wretched souls. Each of the after-death zones in Mayan mythology consisted of multiple levels. Instead of the European view that heaven and hell were permanent places for different quality spirits to end up in, the upper, middle, and underworlds were frequently temporary abodes only. The middle world, being the normal earth for living people, only has one level. The Chiba tree of life grows through all the layers. The Poka-Tok ball game, mirrors, and Maya religion. The Olmec people had already been playing their culturally important ball game for hundreds of years. The Maya picked it up on this spectacular event and developed their own version. Instead of eye-shaped courts, theirs were mostly rectangular, but sometimes had higher walls and hoops. The rules remained primarily the same. No feet or hands could touch the ball. It was played in teams, and the struggle went on between the two teams using a hard rubber ball. The idea that the losers would go on to provide bodies for sacrifice fell apart a bit once more Mayan glyphs were translated. Instead, the winners enjoyed the privilege of moving on to Tamawanchan right away, without struggling anymore on the earthly plane of existence of going through Xibalba. Although some historians argue against this practice, glyphs near the game fields tell otherwise. One of the most popular Poka-Tok locations in Chichen Itza clearly shows the winning captain going under the blade. Quite frankly, it makes sense. To the ancient Maya, a direct trip to Tamawanchan would feel like winning a massive lottery. Of course, this did not happen all the time. Teams gained followers who would come out to support them in their quest for a win, much like fans do for modern sports. If the Maya kept killing the winners, soon they would have had no one to play the game. Suffice it to say that it was an important part of their religious and cultural identity. Not all Maya religious activities were so brutal or disturbing. They guided children into safe wells to talk with the gods, offered gold, shells, and ceremonial goods, celebrated arranged marriages, and frequently had dances with costumes and symbolic props. The mysteries surrounding the religious beliefs and practices of the Maya people are solved only by looking at the books, carvings, paintings, and artifacts they left behind. Unfortunately, due to the efforts by the Spanish bishop and others who came over to assimilate the ancient civilization into their own through conquest, many details have been lost forever. Architectural style, methods, and materials. Most people who have watched historical documentaries or have followed news stories of archaeological discoveries over the years have seen the iconic images of Mayan temples and pyramids rising above the lush green grass and verdant jungles of the Mesoamerican landscape. These step pyramids represent probably the most well-known styles of architecture that the Maya created. However, of course, they were only used for religious purposes and not an integral part of everyday life for the people who lived in these areas. One important thing to recognize about the ancient Maya was that religion was so integrated into their lives that they did not particularly create their temples or pyramids in a different way from a builder's perspective. Of course, farmers and craftsmen did not live and work in towering pyramids. However, the intricate stonework and construction methods did not differ much. Influences from the Olmec. The earlier civilizations of the Olmec people gave the Mayan plenty of inspiration and techniques for their own building projects. The archaeological dig sites of San Lorenzo and La Venta City showed detailed stone fitting, the neat building of doorways and windows, and pits or ball courts dug out of the ground before being surrounded by walls. In fact, a lot of the information about the earlier Olmec civilization came from studying its influence on the Aztec and Maya who came after them. Although most of the Olmec city details have degraded extensively due to erosion and regrowth of the jungle, the shapes and alignment of the buildings had an influence on how the Mayan architectural masterpieces were constructed. What materials did the Maya use? Local stone made up the bulk of Mayan architecture and the buildings for all the civilizations in the Mesoamerican area. These included limestone, sandstone, basalt, and other volcanic rock. All of this was patiently shaped and fitted using stone tools as the construction occurred before the development of bronze. Despite the lack of more modern tools, the people here did develop unique materials to help them construct their long-lasting masterpieces. For example, some stones sat on mortar fashioned from burned lime and a clever mixture of sand and stone fragments. Other buildings just used mud. The Maya people also used a form of stucco, which is any type of rough coating with a basis of cement, sand, and lime. The Mayan people used it quite a lot to cover their walls and create their unique three-dimensional steels and stories. Some walls were solid stone. Others were primarily stucco over a frame. And still others had solid exteriors and a layer of rubble within. Most buildings undoubtedly had thatch or wooden roofing, which degraded over the years and disappeared. There's quite a bit of evidence that the Maya painted their interior and exterior walls with natural colors in red, blue, green, and yellow. The ruins we see today, no matter how magnificent they appear, would certainly have been absolutely amazing in these bright hues. Overall shapes and architectural style. While, as mentioned above, not everyone lived or worked inside a pyramid, the general step shapes seen in them were quite popular across entire cities. A large complex could consist of broad platform stone with step sides that extended the whole length of the hill. While rather standard rectangular buildings lined these platforms, more pyramid-shaped structures existed for prominent purposes. Like the Olmec, the Maya put their religious leaders and locations on a higher level than buildings used for commerce or everyday use. They also had ball courts in all their cities. Other common structures included palaces, temples, shrines, residential buildings, and palaces with multiple rooms, cooking areas, and bathhouses or lavatories. The layout of the cities themselves depended largely on how the land was formed. They did not have bulldozers, of course, so larger, flat areas were chosen from the start. If the land sloped up, they built steps. They connected higher plateaus with raised walkways and paths covered with stucco and stone. The direction buildings faced mattered too. Just like a modern architect would position a house or important building so it faced a great view, so too did the Mayan people. This seemed especially useful for religious buildings, which may have faced the rising sun in the east. Political systems and rulers determined regions. Although this ancient civilization in Mesoamerica had very impressive cities, they were not built as capitals, where the leading king or leader would live and rule from. There was not just one king. Instead, the Mayan civilization had multiple rulers who lived and worked out of the different cities or communities scattered throughout their total range. Instead of a monarchy, the political system was closer to an organized group of city-states. They were all part of the same people but had different ways of living and focused on different resources or products. The groups occasionally fought for control or wealth building, traded with each other regularly, and otherwise did not interact in any great manner. Nevertheless, they shared the bulk of their culture and religious beliefs. They also shared architectural styles and layout designs. As with most cities or communities from ancient times anywhere on Earth, the leaders and the religious powers were most prominent in each region. They had the largest houses, tallest temples, and more land in general than the merchants and working class. The Maya built Chichen Itza, Uxmal, Bonampak, and Altunja, which you can still find on a journey to Central America today. Of course, they do not look the same as they did back in the early days, and the people who live there differ quite a bit in appearance and lifestyle to the ones that once called it home. Most famous Mayan building sites. The well-known Mayan ruins remain a stop on the list for historians and tourists alike. These three distinctly unique and mysterious areas offer the splendor for soaring pyramid temples, a glorious city with a focus on trade and prosperity, and the last remaining place where people can enjoy the colorful painting that the Maya people once used on their many buildings and decorations. The story of the discovery of the Canal, or snakes, and their effort to create an empire begins in Tikal, the city of their most hated enemy. Just as Tikal dominated the Maya lowlands for centuries, it's dominated Maya archaeology since the 1950s. The sprawling city once had a population approaching 60,000, and its elegant buildings surely dazzled visitors in AD 750, much as they do tourists today. It also had hundreds of beautifully carved tombstone-like blocks called stelae. Using the inscriptions on them, scientists reconstructed Tikal's history until its fall in the 9th century. But there was an odd gap, roughly from 560 to 690, when no stelae were carved and little else was built. Baffled by this 130-year break, archaeologists called it the Tikal hiatus and chalked it up as a mystery of the ancient Maya. Archaeologists began filling in the gap in the 1960s when they noticed an odd glyph scattered around various classic sites. A snakehead with a clownish grin and surrounded by markings associated with royalty. In 1973, archaeologist Joyce Marcus recognized it as an emblem glyph, words for a city and ruling title that served as a sort of coat of arms. She wondered if it could be related to the Tikal hiatus. What if some unknown warriors had conquered the city? If they had, where would such a force have come from? And wouldn't archaeologists be familiar with it? Palenque, late Mayan city. Although the original Mayan name for this northern city differs, Palenque, which means fortified place, describes it very well. It was a vibrant city in the Mesoamerican world around 600 to 750 CE, although other reports say the area was populated from as early as 225 BCE. As it was at a convenient juncture between the more agricultural inland area and the coastal plains, it stood as a beacon for trade in those centuries. A wide varieties of goods float in and out of the city on a regular basis. Multiple kings ruled Palenque throughout the years and added and changed things as they saw fit. Due to the prosperity of those eras, the city grew to be quite large and impressive. Today, UNESCO has listed it as a World Heritage Site, and it's one of the most common destinations for tourists who wish to experience the unique Central American culture from ancient times. Most of the buildings and possibly artifacts are still buried underground and beneath the jungle growth. Since the city lasted for so many years, it has distinct sections from different time periods and royal families. Its great buildings rest on 3 different layers that follow the natural lay of the land up the tree-covered hill. The massive palace at the top has many doorways, a 4-story tower, and a much larger inner room than found in other places in the Mayan Empire. This makes the city quite unique compared to others in the Mayan civilization. The royal palace claims the prominent space in the town instead of a temple. Besides the impressive stone structures fashioned from mostly limestone, visitors can still see evidence of the opulent surroundings characterized by man-made pools and fountains, brightly colored paintings inside protected from the elements, and many intricate and beautiful stucco carvings. The palace was not only a thing of beauty and comfort, however, it also showcased a considerably effective laboratory system that allowed the royal waste to be whisked away in an underground stream. Of course, no Mayan city would be complete without an impressive religious building or compound. Although it was not at the center, the 9-story pyramid temple mimicked the local belief of the multi-layered underworld. Upon its discovery and exploration in the 1950s, a secret passageway from the top was found to wind down to a hidden chamber deep inside with several skeletons surrounded by decorations and jade figures. Inside lay King Pakal the Great, who was generally considered to be the top ruler of Palenque. The records show that it was built before the king died and not after, like all the other pyramids in the other Mayan cities. Yaxchilan, trade city on the river. The riverside city has some of the most impressive walls and stonework of any other site in the Mayan civilization. It lies near the Usumacinta River on the Yucatan Peninsula. Although it existed some 400 years earlier, it really became a popular trade center from between 580 CE and 800 CE. Due to the damage to some walls and other obvious signs, historians believe that the city fell due to local warfare and disruption. Some of the most unique architectural features of the Yaxchilan include massive stone pillars that seem to indicate the bridge was built across the river, in addition of Hyatt terraces on the hills surrounding the city, and intricate stone roof designs that towered some 3 or 4 stories overhead. The largest structure in the city was built to honor a king designated by the descriptor bird jaguar, who was immortalized in the top of the roof in intricate carvings and stucco work. According to the legends depicted there, the king was quite instrumental in expanding the city and building dozens of new monuments to various gods and other rulers. One of the major attractions of this Mayan city comes from the unique and plentiful sculptures in steel on both buildings and simply propped up around the property. There's a type of historical representation of artistic change that occurred somewhere around 850 CE. The front-forward figures with less detail gave way to profile designs with high degrees of intricacy. Some told stories of the might of the bird jaguar king, showed bloodletting rituals and brutal treatment of captives. Depictions of the rain god, a serpent, and the queen are also visible with remnants of color still visible on the surfaces. What are already incredibly detailed, three-dimensional carvings would have looked absolutely stunning in bold reds, blues, and greens. Although some of the stelae and lintel designs have been removed to various museums in the past few decades, interested tourists who visit Central America looking for the mysteries of the Maya people can still see plenty of carvings, hieroglyphics, and amazing architecture all around them. Yaxchilan has a lot to offer both historians and curious people from all over the world who want to learn more about ancient civilizations. Bonampak, colorful history preserved. What a thing differentiates Bonampak from the other cities listed above: colored murals. The first and earliest city exists as a unique and intricate example of fine stonework carving. The second adds a new type of artwork and freestanding stelae scattered about the grounds. This city offers richly colored and unique painted frescoes that show off everything from life in the royal palace to battle scenes and bloody rituals. The appropriately named Temple of the Paintings contains 3 large murals that grace the inner protected walls of 3 stone chambers. Archaeologists figure that they survived the long centuries between their creation and now because they were shut away from the weather. No other examples of Mayan artifacts give so much information about the colors they commonly used on their carvings and what went on in their civilization so long ago. The 3 murals tell the story of a king who married the daughter of another king around 970 CE. This was undoubtedly a common way for the city-states to declare their intentions to live peacefully and cooperate with one another. One mural has highly stylized depictions of gods at the top, a line of intricately dressed nobility standing in the middle, and someone presenting an infant to them from a raised platform on the right, while the king and queen look on from the other side. It's interesting to see the intricate costuming that nobles at the time must have worn. They were roped with jaguar skins, decorated with colorful feathers, and had unique and varied headdresses. Also included on that wall are a collection of musicians and ceremony watchers in masks. The second mural gives an incredibly active depiction of a great battle between enemies. This was probably between 2 clans or city-states. Of course, as the mural exists in this particular city, the king there is depicted as quite the hero who's captured one of the enemy warriors. Also represented are military captains, the queen, and various noblemen. They wear jaguar heads and skins, chest plates of jade, and carry mighty spears. The captives are, of course, dejected and unrobed, lying on the ground. The third mural shows off the joyous outcome of the successful battle and capture of several enemies. The royals and nobles gather around to watch the king engage in ritualistic bloodletting. Outside the palace, on another part of the same mural, dancers cavort and honor the king and warriors, while musicians play instruments and people wave flags. With so many unique and wonderful Mayan cities, temples, ball courts, palaces, and individual artifacts spread out across a large part of the Central American region, the study of mysterious Mesoamerica has a lot of information to go on. Unlike the Olmec, the Mayan people recorded a lot of information about their rulers, religious beliefs, and everyday life in the form of hieroglyphics and artwork on the walls. So much of it still exists down in the intricate stonework and stucco surfaces that make up the walls of their buildings and temples. Despite all this information, they're not the ultimate source of information about the mysterious Mesoamerican civilizations.